Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Mr. Storyteller. Before you dive into tonight's nightmare, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now, get comfortable and relax.
Under the neon glow of a remote highway miles away from any semblance of civilization, the dilapidated gas station exuded a silent menace. It was a place spoken of in hushed tones, a waypoint where local legends intertwined with hushed whispers, and strange occurrences had made it a landmark of unease. Jack Harper, a seasoned long-haul trucker with creased eyes and a collection of wild stories from countless dark roads, steered his rig toward the gas station. He didn't need more fuel. He was searching for answers to a mystery that had haunted him since that fateful night years ago. Tonight, the station's flickering neon sign, Luna's Stop, beckoned him. Even in the dead of night, a warmth seemed to radiate from its worn facade, yet a sense of dread accompanied that glow. Jack's arrival was marked by the unnerving creak of an aging sign swinging in the wind. The asphalt was marred by tire ruts that led to the pump, and the station's windows reflected back a warped vision of his own face. He parked, turned off the engine, and grabbed his flashlight and a thermos of stale coffee. The building's door groaned as he pushed it open, and inside the musty darkness he found not one, but two figures huddled behind a counter, cluttered with dusty memorabilia. One, an elderly man with a stooped posture and eyes that missed nothing, and the other, a wide-eyed young woman whose trembling hands betrayed secrets too heavy for her slender frame. "Evenin'," Jack greeted cautiously, voice echoing in the sparse space. The old man nodded slowly, his voice a gravelly whisper. "Been a long while since we had company," he said. "I'm Wesley." The woman murmured something indiscernible from the shadowed corner. Jack's eyes narrowed as he regarded them. He had passed many roadside diners and gas stations before, but something about this place and its guardians seemed steeped in a foreboding that defied explanation. While refueling his thoughts with a brief nod, Jack decided to ask the questions burning in his mind. "This place, it's more than just a stop, isn't it?" he said, his tone laced with wary curiosity. "There's rumors, dark stories, things that happen after midnight." Wesley exchanged a glance with the young woman. "Stories? More like memories," Wesley replied, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. "I remember long ago when travelers would come in desperate, their faces etched with terror. They'd speak of strange lights, phantom figures, and voices calling their names from the black hills around." The air seemed to thicken as the conversation continued. Jack's pulse raced with anticipation and a twinge of anxiety. "I've been on the road for years," he admitted, "and I've heard whispers, but I never expected to find something alive, holding on to the tale." A sharp knock interrupted their exchange. The door banged open, revealing a man in a stained jacket and shadowed eyes, his frame half hidden by the gloom. His voice carried a warning, "Don't trust the old stories. This place, it isn't a refuge, it's a trap." For a moment, the atmosphere turned brittle. Who was he? Was he yet another soul scarred by the darkness of this stop? Before anyone could respond, a crescendo of distant thunder rolled in from nowhere, and the weather outside shifted ominously. The bright neon sign flickered violently. Lightning revealed brief glimpses of figures, or perhaps just illusions, lurking around the perimeter of the lot. The sound of rain intensified, as if the heavens were trying to drown out the murmurs of the past. Jack felt an inexplicable pull, the sensation of being watched. His hand instinctively brushed the worn strap of a personal revolver tucked at his belt. "I'm just a traveler," he said, with forced calm, "and tonight seems to have more stories than fuel." But his gaze told a different narrative. It was the look of a man who'd stared death in the face and lived to tell of its secrets. Their conversation shifted to the unspoken tension of the gas station's history. Wesley explained, voice trembling with recollection, that decades ago, under a full moon much like tonight, the station had been the scene of inexplicable events. "A family," he said, "stopped for a refill on a lonely stretch of road much like this one. They were never seen again. Local lore says that on some nights you can hear their cries, their pleas for help, echoing from the pumps." The young woman, whose name was Marla, began to weep softly. "I grew up near here," she whispered, "and the memories of that day, they haunt me even now." Jack's mind raced, piecing together fragments of memory. Years earlier, on a stormy night, he had witnessed a phantom figure in the headlights of his truck, a spectral woman whose eyes pleaded silently. A night drive through the desert, after a rig breakdown, the figure had vanished into the darkness. He dismissed it then as a trick of the mind. Now he questioned his own recollections. As if summoned by their collective unease, the building shuddered. Lights sputtered and dimmed as a floorboard creaked ominously under an unseen weight. Jack's military training kicked in. Every shadow was a potential ambush, every creak a signal. "Who else is here?" he demanded, moving cautiously toward the back of the station. The sound of footsteps echoed, uncomfortably paced, as if someone deliberately manipulated the distance between every step. Wesley and Marla exchanged knowing glances. "There's something else about this place," Wesley said, voice barely above a whisper. "They say that when the night is thick with despair, the souls trapped on these grounds come to reclaim their stories. And tonight, it might be their time." A draft of bitter wind swept through the corridors, and the temperature plunged, causing Jack's breath to cloud in the beam of his flashlight. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind him, plunging him into near darkness except for the weak light of his torch. "Who's there? Show yourself," Jack demanded, his voice echoing in the narrow passage. A disembodied voice answered, a low mumble that sounded like it was coming from the walls. "You carry the burden of roads traveled alone, yet you dare disrupt our peace." The words were neither threatening nor inviting. They were the sound of a long-held sorrow that demanded justice for a cruel fate. Jack's pulse hammered as he tried to steady himself. He could see fleeting shapes in the hall, a reflection of figures that didn't quite belong to the station, shadows with too human a quality, faces twisted in eternal anguish. With every step he took toward the rear exit, his mind conjured images of the missing family, of the spectral woman from his past, and of the ghostly eyes in every reflection. He reached a narrow service hall lined with old machinery and storage shelves. Here, he discovered a hidden room behind a false wall. Inside, the relics of the station's grim history lay scattered. Old photographs, a child's doll with glassy eyes, worn notebooks with frantic handwriting scrawled in red. As Jack flipped through a journal, he found entries detailing the inexplicable events that had plagued the station for decades. The entries told tales of tragic accidents, apparitions, and sudden disappearances. One particular entry, dated over 30 years ago, spoke of a ritual gone wrong, an attempt to conjure help that instead opened a door to something both ancient and malevolent. In that candlelit gloom, Jack sensed the presence of the long dead. An icy whisper filled the chamber. The past never truly dies. The realization struck him. This station was not cursed by the misfortune of a few. It was a nexus of sorrow, guilt, and unresolved pain. Every pump, every creaking board bore witness to the ceaseless lament of lost souls. Meanwhile, back in the main room, Wesley and Marla huddled together with the mysterious stranger who now revealed himself as Cyril, a wanderer who had once been trapped in the clutches of that very horror. "You must leave before it claims you," Cyril hissed urgently. "We're all prisoners here, tethered to the echoes of our sins." His eyes darted toward the closed service hall as if expecting something or someone to emerge. The storm outside erupted in a cacophony of howling wind and torrential rain. In the charged silence that followed, Jack reappeared, clutching the journal. "I need to know why this place holds such darkness," he said. His voice was steady, yet beneath it lay the quiver of a man confronting long-hidden terror. "Who are we to be forgotten in the ravages of time?" Cyril stepped forward, his face etched with sorrow and resolve. "There was a time when this station was meant to be a sanctuary, a crossroads for souls, a place for solace and renewal. But greed, betrayal, and the desperate need to extend our mortal lives twisted that purpose. A ritual was attempted to bind the spirits to our realm forever, and now each passing traveler unknowingly adds to our ranks." His words hung in the air like a death knell. Marla's eyes filled with tears. "I grew up hearing my mother's frightened tales about the pump that never stopped. I always thought they were just nightmares." Her voice broke, punctuated by sorrow and terror. "I now understand that the nightmares were memories. Our past is here, trapped in the asphalt and rusted metal." Jack's grip tightened on the journal as he realized that this was not just superstition. It was a veritable horror that transcended the ordinary. The station's history was written in the margins of every lost moment, every muffled scream into the void. "So what do we do?" he asked, echoing the unspoken plea of those suffering souls. How do we silence the past? Cyril's face hardened. We must confront it. The only way to break the cycle is to return what was taken. In a tremulous voice, Wesley interjected, "And what was taken?" "Our innocence, our lives." His answer was a bitter laugh. "No, something far darker, the remembrance of a life that was cut short." As the group deliberated, the gas station seemed to come alive with whispered memories. Faint light revealed spectral scenes, a family frozen in time at the pump, a young man reaching out to an unseen force, a woman pleading for salvation. The tragedy of those moments collided with the present, creating an overwhelming tapestry of grief and despair. A soft, almost sorrowful voice resonated from one of the old mirrors on the wall. "Release us. Find the truth behind our end." Jack's resolve solidified. "I will uncover it," he declared, stepping toward a set of stairs that descended into the station's hidden basement. With each step, the air grew colder, heavy with the weight of lost time. The passage was lined with cracked tiles and remnants of old advertisements, promising an idealized version of America, a promise that was lost to time and evil. In the basement, amongst dusty relics, Jack found a large, dusty ledger bound in worn leather. Its pages chronicled unspeakable details, dates of tragic accidents, names of vanished travelers, and descriptions of rituals performed in desperation. The ledger hinted at a secret pact made by the station's original founders, an agreement meant to secure prosperity through the capture of souls. The ritual had backfired disastrously, condemning all who passed the station's threshold to eternal wandering in limbo. As Jack absorbed these revelations, a low moan reverberated through the space. Shadows began to coalesce into human-like forms, circling him like vultures. They whispered in a language that was neither fully heard nor understood, their voices a cacophony of pleading, hatred, and regret. "Release us," they repeated over and over, an endless litany of sorrow that made the very foundation of the station tremble. Suddenly, a spectral hand reached out from the darkness, its touch cold and insistent on Jack's shoulder. He jerked away, nearly colliding with Cyril, who had followed him silently. "You must finish the ledger," Cyril urged, his voice both stern and sympathetic. "The only way to break our bond is to set the record straight." With shaking hands, Jack deciphered more entries, piecing together the final part of the ritual. It demanded a sacrifice, not in blood, but in truth. The truth of betrayal, of greed, and of the inevitability of remorse. As the storm raged above, Jack, Cyril, Wesley, and Marla gathered in the center of the basement. With trembling voices and taut determination, they recited the incantation recorded in the ledger. Their words mingled with the howling wind and the keening voices of the damned, creating an eerie harmony that resonated deep within the station's decaying walls. As they recited the final line, a moment of profound stillness enveloped the basement. Then the ground quaked violently, and a blinding light erupted from the ledger as if it were a beacon of salvation. The spectral forms around them convulsed and shrieked. A cacophonous chorus of voices, half in anguish and half in gratitude, filled every corner of the basement. Jack felt as though he were caught in a vortex, time and space twisting into an indistinct blur. For a seemingly endless moment, he saw flashes of lives interrupted, of dreams shattered by brutal fate, and of silent pleas for redemption. The voices, no longer malevolent but imbued with a mournful relief, began to dissipate like mist in the morning sun. When the trembling subsided, the oppressive weight of the past lifted almost imperceptibly from the air. The ledger's pages fluttered and came to rest open, its final words barely legible in the dim light. "Let truth be our guide, and let sorrow find its peace." In that fragile whisper of sanity, the station seemed to exhale a long-held secret, releasing the chains that had bound it for so long. The group slowly emerged from the basement, bleary-eyed and shaken, yet carrying a glimmer of hope. Outside, the neon sign flickered with renewed intensity, a symbol of a cleansing after the storm. Wesley, with a tear tracing down his weathered face, said, "We've witnessed a truth older than time, a truth that binds not through malice, but through remorse." Marla, voice steadier now, added, "I will never forget the faces of those who suffered. Their stories must be told with respect, so they may find peace." Jack, burdened with the weight of countless road miles and unspoken memories, contemplated his next steps. His road had always been solitary, lit only by the headlights of his massive truck and haunted by fleeting apparitions on empty highways. But tonight he recognized that sometimes one must pause and listen to the voices of the past. "I'm no longer just a traveler," he said softly. "I'm a keeper of memories, a witness to the forgotten souls that once needed us." Cyril nodded solemnly. "Each of us carries a shard of that truth. By acknowledging the horror and the hope, we free not only them but ourselves." With that, the storm began to relent, the skies softening from an angry gray to a gentle, muted blue. The oppressive chill receded, replaced by a tentative warmth that hinted at dawn's arrival. As the first light crept over the horizon, the group shared a quiet moment of understanding. The gas station, once a looming edifice of despair, now stood as a testament to redemption. Its scars, its faded paint, and even its creaking floors bore witness to the passage of time, to the wounds that had slowly begun to heal. It was a place of both horror and hope, a crossroads where the dead and the living exchanged tales, and where the price of oblivion was measured in the currency of memory. Jack stepped back into his rig, pausing as he looked back one last time at Luna's stop. The station seemed to smile in the gentle morning light, no longer a relic of terror, but a monument to the enduring nature of truth. As he started the engine, a sense of profound responsibility filled him. He would drive on, his headlights cutting through the lingering mist, carrying with him the stories of a place that had taught him that every road, no matter how lonely, held within it the echoes of countless lives. In the quiet of that transformative dawn, Jack realized that horror, in its rawest form, was not simply the terror that froze the blood. It was the cry of souls left unheard, the whisper of regret across time, and the promise that even the darkest places could one day be bathed in the light of redemption. His journey was now intertwined with a legacy of both sorrow and healing, a commitment to ensure that the stories of the forgotten would never be silenced by time. And so, with a final glance at the gas station that had once been a beacon of dread, Jack drove off into the emerging day, each mile a quiet tribute to the souls he had encountered and the truth he had helped set free.
Story number 2.
A biting October wind rattled the windows of St. Emery's Hospital as night fell, casting long, erratic shadows across the sterile halls. The hospital, a massive brick building with an unsettling reputation, had stood on the outskirts of town for decades. Locals whispered of inexplicable events within its walls, a chilling past that refused to vanish, lurking in the corridors and dark corners even after the emergency lights had been switched off for the night. Dr. Evelyn Cutter, new to the hospital's night shift, stepped through the revolving glass doors with a mix of determination and trepidation. The building's interior was starkly lit by fluorescent tubes that flickered sporadically, creating a staccato rhythm that mimicked a failing heartbeat. Evelyn had heard the rumors, inexplicable murmurs in the empty corridors, shadows that moved just outside the corner of one's eye, and patients whose conditions worsened for no logical reason. Yet she resolved to rely on her medical expertise, dismissing the eerie lore as mere superstition. As she made her rounds through the intensive care unit, she noticed a peculiar chill that didn't belong to the air conditioning system. In room 212, where a young man, Ryan, lay in a coma after a severe car accident, the machines beeped steadily. Yet when Evelyn paused for a moment to check his vitals, the rhythm of the monitor faltered, as if disturbed by something unseen. "Come on, Ryan. Stay with me," she murmured, more to convince herself than him, as a shadow brushed past her peripheral vision. She spun around, expecting to see a colleague or a patient, but found nothing but the empty corridor and the echo of her own footsteps. In the nurse's station, Nurse Marcus Reed eyed Evelyn with a knowing look as he prepared to leave for his break. "You're new here, aren't you?" he said in a low, gravelly voice. "I'd be careful around here after midnight. St. Emery isn't like any other hospital you've worked in." Marcus leaned in, lowering his voice further. "They say the souls of those who've died here never really leave." Evelyn forced a smile. "I'm sure it's just hospital lore." But as Marcus departed, his heavy boots fading into the distance, an inexplicable shiver ran down her spine. The night crept forward, carrying with it an unsettling silence that pressed against the walls of the hospital. In the dimly lit corridors, the echo of footsteps mingled with whispers that one might have mistaken for the hum of distant machinery. Evelyn found herself drawn to the abandoned wing, an area shuttered off years ago after a series of inexplicable deaths. Though technically off limits, her curiosity compelled her to peek inside. The corridor was a relic of the past. Peeling wallpaper, rusted fixtures, and broken windows that allowed the moonlight to spill inside in ghostly patterns. As she walked down the hall, her footsteps echoed alongside a faint rhythmic tapping. It was as if someone or something was pacing intentionally. "Hello?" she called out softly. No answer came, only the continual tap, tap, tap that resonated in the silence. The sound led her to a door marked quarantine in faded letters. Inside, she found a room filled with old hospital equipment and scattered patient files. The air was heavy with dust and an odor of antiseptic long since abandoned. In the corner, a rusted wheelchair creaked ever so slightly, though no one sat in it. Before she could react, a voice, barely above a whisper, echoed through the darkness. "Help us." The plea was both pitiful and urgent, layered with an ancient sorrow that tugged at the edges of Evelyn's rational mind. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice trembling despite her attempts to sound confident. The old door behind her slammed shut, plunging her into near darkness except for the faint light of her mobile phone screen. In that moment, the temperature dropped drastically, and she saw a fleeting reflection in an old mirror. A gaunt face with hollow eyes that seemed to plead silently for help. Heart pounding, she retreated from the abandoned wing and returned to the relative safety of the main hospital. Throughout the rest of her rounds, Evelyn couldn't shake the memory of that face. Each patient she checked on bore an inexplicable sadness in their eyes, as if they were aware of the sinister secret that haunted the hallways. In the psychiatric unit, she encountered Mrs. Beauregard, an elderly woman whose eyes wandered as if observing things unseen by others. "They're here," Mrs. Beauregard croaked, her voice laced with both fear and resignation. "The ones that remain." Her words echoed in Evelyn's mind as she left the room, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. The night deepened, and the hospital seemed to awaken in a way that defied logic. In the operating theater, a team of surgeons was preparing for an emergency procedure on a patient with a mysterious, life-threatening condition. As the anesthesia took effect, the operating room lights began to flicker, and shadows danced along the walls with an almost deliberate intent. During the critical moment, the lead surgeon, Dr. Malcolm Rise, called out to his team, "Focus, people. We need steady hands here." Yet, as they worked, he couldn't help but notice a reflection in the surgical lamp that was not his own. A spectral figure, its face partially concealed by darkness, seemed to smile sorrowfully before vanishing into thin air. "Malcolm?" whispered a voice that no one else heard, sending a chill through his spine. Though the procedure was saved by the surgeon's skill and composure, an unspoken tension gripped everyone in the room, a lingering sense that something had intruded upon their sacred space. Back in the nurse's station, Marcus sat with a cup of lukewarm coffee, his eyes distant and troubled. When Evelyn approached him again, his face hardened in a grim expression. "I've seen patients in this hospital who remember things they shouldn't," he confided. "They speak of voices calling them from empty hallways or eyes that follow their every move. There are nights when the building feels alive, as if it's hungry for memories." Evelyn felt a lump form in her throat. "What do you mean?" she asked, leaning in closer. "I saw something last night that I can't explain. A face in the mirror, voices asking for help." Marcus nodded slowly. "St. Emery is built on tragedies, on the remnants of lives lost here long ago, and sometimes those remnants decide they're not done yet." At that moment, the hospital's emergency alarm startled them, a blaring, discordant sound that sliced through the atmosphere. The call came from the maternity ward, where a young mother, Alicia, had just been admitted after suffering complications during delivery. Rushing to the ward, Evelyn found Alicia in a state of shock, her eyes wild with terror. "They tried to take my baby," Alicia stammered, clutching a faded blanket tightly. "In the shadows, I saw a figure. It wasn't human. It whispered that my child was not meant to live." Evelyn knelt beside her, her clinical mind racing through possible explanations, but also feeling an inexplicable dread. "I'm here, Alicia. You're safe now," she soothed, though in her heart, she feared that the hospital itself might be playing tricks on her mind. As the night progressed, the bizarre occurrences grew increasingly frequent and unexplainable. A janitor, Mr. Bryant, reported seeing a figure in an old-fashioned nurse's uniform gliding silently through the corridors, her eyes fixed on a point in the distance. Another staff member, a security guard, swore he heard the clattering of a wheelchair in an empty hallway, accompanied by a soft weeping melody that no one could trace to any source. At the stroke of 3 a.m., the most disquieting event took place. Deep within the rarely used archives of the hospital, Evelyn received a frantic knock on her door. Cautiously, she opened it to find Cyril, an overweight hospital porter with a perpetually anxious expression. "Doctor, you've got to come down to the archives," he gasped. I saw something that shouldn't be there." With little time to question him, Evelyn followed him down a spiral staircase that led to a basement lined with rows of dusty filing cabinets and forgotten records. The air was damp, heavy with the scent of mildew and decay. In the dim light provided by a single overhead bulb, Cyril led her to an open cabinet. Inside lay patient records from decades ago, meticulously kept until they were abandoned when the hospital's reputation began to crumble. On one particular record, the name Elizabeth Hargrove was scribbled in faded ink. Cyril's hands trembled as he pointed to a section detailing her mysterious death following childbirth, a case that had been quickly dismissed as a postpartum tragedy. "They say she never left," he whispered. "Every time I pass by here, I feel her presence. And tonight, she followed me." As if on cue, the overhead light flickered violently, casting grotesque shadows across the papers. Evelyn's eyes scanned the record and caught a final note scribbled in a frantic hand. "I don't belong here. The hospital holds me captive. Save me." The plea sent a shiver down her spine, and for a moment every story of haunted hospitals she had ever heard came rushing back. Determined to uncover the truth, Evelyn began piecing together the fragments of forgotten history. She interrogated old files, cross-referenced anecdotal reports from staff, and discovered a tragic pattern woven into the fabric of the hospital's past. A series of unexplained deaths, misdiagnoses, and erratic equipment failures over the past 50 years revealed that St. Emery's had been built atop the old land of a small settlement, one that had been ravaged by disease and despair. The hospital's construction, it seemed, had disturbed a burial ground, a resting place for souls burdened with unfulfilled promises and untimely demises. In hushed conversation with Nurse Marcus and Porter Cyril, the theory emerged that the restless spirits were not simply wandering aimlessly, but were reaching out for acknowledgement, for justice. "They're not here to scare us," Marcus insisted, his voice steadied by years of witnessing the inexplicable. "They're here because they want us to remember them, to learn from our mistakes." That notion took on a more literal significance when, in the dead of night, the power suddenly cut out. The hospital plunged into darkness, illuminated only by the sporadic glow of emergency exit signs. Panic gripped the corridors as patients groaned in confusion and fear. Evelyn grabbed her flashlight and dashed through the labyrinthine hallways, guided by the distant sounds of cries and faint echoing footsteps. She reached the maternity ward, where Alicia still sat trembling in the corner. Before Evelyn could soothe her, a spectral figure emerged from behind a curtain, a lady in antiquated clothing, her face twisted in anguish. You took my child," the apparition hissed, her voice quivering with sorrow and rage. In the strobe-like flashes of lightning outside, Evelyn saw not malice but a profound grief in the ghost's eyes. "Please," Evelyn pleaded, her voice soft yet commanding, "I only want to help. Tell me what happened." The ghost's eyes locked with Evelyn's. "I was taken from my home," the spirit lamented, "and forced into this place of cold, unyielding steel. They stole my child away, promising me eternal care, but all I found was isolation and loss." With that, the ghost's form flickered and faded, leaving only a lingering sadness behind. Evelyn's heart ached with the weight of centuries-old injustice. This was not the work of some malevolent poltergeist, but the desperate cry of a soul wronged by fate and forgotten by time. The power was eventually restored, but the unsettling events continued unabated until dawn. In the early morning hours, as the hospital's restless inhabitants settled into an uneasy semblance of normalcy, Evelyn found herself before the administrative office, determined to bring the hidden truths into the light. She confronted the hospital's longtime administrator, Mr. Dalton, whose cold, calculating eyes reflected decades of bureaucratic indifference. "You know full well that St. Emery's isn't just a hospital," Evelyn said firmly. "It's a mausoleum of memories, and you've been hiding these stories." Dalton's lips curled into a bitter smile. "Stories," he scoffed, "are just words. This institution has saved lives for generations, and if a few restless souls linger, so be it." But Evelyn pressed on, recounting every eerie encounter, every spectral cry for help that had disrupted the night. They're not mere superstitions, she argued. They're the voices of those abandoned by a system that values profit over compassion. Dalton's mask of indifference faltered for a split second, revealing something akin to regret. Or was it guilt? I didn't know, he stammered weakly, his voice almost inaudible under the weight of his own memories. In that moment, Evelyn realized that the hospital, much like its ghosts, was haunted by its past misdeeds, a legacy of neglect that no amount of modern medicine could exorcise. As dawn broke, with pale light filtering through smudged windows, Evelyn made a final round through the wards. The eerie disturbances had subsided somewhat, but the scars of the night remained etched into the walls, into the minds of those who had borne witness. In a quiet corner of the hospital chapel, she paused before an old statue of a guardian angel, her thoughts heavy with both sorrow and resolve. "I will not let these voices be silenced," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone present. Outside, as the first rays of sunlight battled away the oppressive night, the hospital exhaled a long-held secret, a promise of remembrance and redemption. Patients began to stir, staff resumed their routines, and somewhere deep within the labyrinth of corridors, a soft, almost imperceptible sigh echoed, a sigh that carried both the weight of suffering and the hope of absolution. Evelyn knew that she had been irrevocably changed by the night's experiences. The hospital, with all its cold machinery and whitewashed walls, was more than just a building. It was a repository of broken dreams and lost souls. And while those shadows might one day fade in the light of truth, the memories they carried would forever whisper warnings in the dark. In the ensuing days, Evelyn devoted herself to documenting every encounter. She compiled testimonies from frightened patients, haunted staff, and even the few who dared to speak of inexplicable occurrences in hushed tones. With every word she recorded, she aimed not only to expose the haunted truths of St. Emery's, but also to shine a light on a deeper, more human horror, how a system built to heal could sometimes entrap the very essence of life, leaving scars that no modern remedy could erase. Over time, whispers of a courageous doctor seeking to bring solace to tormented souls spread beyond the hospital walls. While some dismissed her accounts as fanciful embellishments of a tired imagination, others began to acknowledge that the true horror lay not in otherworldly apparitions, but in the neglect of the human spirit, a neglect that no gleaming facade or technological marvel could easily mask. Late one evening, as dusk settled softly over the town, Evelyn stood by a window in her modest office, gazing at the darkened hospital grounds. The silence was heavy, and in the stillness she sensed the presence of those who had suffered and those who still lingered, waiting for acknowledgement. "I promise you," she murmured, her voice echoing into the empty corridors, "I will make sure your stories are never forgotten." In that solemn vow, the lost souls found a measure of peace, and the hospital, haunted by its layered past, seemed, if only for a moment, to ease its oppressive grip. In the final analysis, St. Emery's was not merely a building of cold steel and sterilized rooms. It was a living archive of human misery and hope. Its ghosts were not aberrations, but reflections of the past that demanded remembrance and understanding. And as long as someone like Evelyn walked its corridors, determined to listen and to heal, the voices of the forgotten would continue to whisper their timeless pleas for redemption.
Story number 3.
Officer Daniel "Danny" Ramirez had seen his fair share of strange calls on the night shift, but nothing could have prepared him for what happened on that cold November evening. The city's outskirts were blanketed by a fog that seemed almost alive, twisting around deserted streets like ethereal fingers. His cruiser's flashing red and blue lights played upon rain-slick asphalt as he raced to the scene of a reported disturbance on a neglected stretch of road outside of town. Danny arrived at a dilapidated warehouse, a forgotten relic on the edge of urban sprawl, and was met by his partner, Detective Lena Ortiz, whose steely gaze betrayed a quiet resolve. Lena, known for her meticulous attention to detail, had staked out this area for weeks after several residents reported eerie sightings and unexplained noises near the abandoned building. Tonight, the radio had crackled with a frantic call. "Officers, something's out there. It's not human. Please help." Despite his rational training, Danny couldn't ignore the prickling sensation at the back of his neck as he stepped out of the cruiser. The warehouse loomed before them, a monolithic structure whose broken windows and peeling paint gave it the look of a decaying beast. Lena led the way, her flashlight cutting a narrow path through the darkness. "Stay sharp," she warned in a hushed tone, her hand resting on her service weapon. "There's something here tonight that doesn't make sense." Danny gave a curt nod. He too had felt that something was terribly off, an oppressive weight in the air that chilled him to the bone. Inside, the warehouse was a maze of shadow and silence. Every step echoed through the cavernous space, and mingling with the low hum of unseen machinery. They moved cautiously down a narrow corridor flanked by rusted doors, each marked with faded numbers. Suddenly, a distant voice drifted on the stale air, a whisper that sounded almost like a plea for help. "Help! Please, help!" It was a sound so plaintive and desperate that it sent shivers racing along Danny's spine. "Did you hear that?" Danny asked, his voice barely more than a breath. Lena nodded, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the darkness. "It's coming from room 314, she replied. "Let's check it out." The door creaked as they pushed it open, revealing a small, dim room that once served as an office. Papers were strewn about, and an old desk lay overturned, its drawers rusted shut. In the center of the room, against the far wall, stood a battered mirror. The glass was smeared with dirt and age, and as they approached, the reflection seemed to ripple unnaturally. "Detective Ortiz, Officer Ramirez," a disembodied voice murmured from within the mirror, its cadence wavering between sorrow and malice. Both officers froze as the voice repeated, "Help me, I'm trapped." Danny's hand instinctively went to his holster. "Who are you?" he demanded, his tone firm, though his heart pounded in his ears. The reflection trembled, distorting the face that appeared, a gaunt, hollow-eyed figure, cloaked in shreds of shadow. "I once was like you," the figure rasped, its lips moving silently. "I was a guardian, a protector, but I was betrayed." The voice echoed in the cramped space, leaving a lingering chill in its wake. Lena stepped closer, her flashlight beam revealing faint scratches on the mirror's surface, as if it had been clawed from within. "Betrayed by who?" she asked, her tone steady despite the terror pooling in her gut. The phantom's gaze shifted, and it answered in a whisper that nearly dissolved into the surrounding darkness. "By those who swore to serve and protect. We were meant to bring justice, but now we are nothing more than cursed souls, forever patrolling these forsaken corridors." Before either officer could react further, the mirror shattered into 1,000 tiny pieces with a sound like breaking glass and the collapse of a long-held secret. The shards scattered across the floor, their glimmering surfaces reflecting distorted images of fear and sorrow. Danny and Lena exchanged a look of disbelief. This wasn't just another case of urban legend. It was something far more insidious, rooted in truths too dark to fathom. Over the next few nights, strange occurrences began haunting every corner of the precinct. At first, it was subtle, a suspect's testimony of hearing urgent whispers in vacant rooms, a cop's hurried report of shadowy figures darting down otherwise empty hallways. But soon the phenomenon reached their very own offices. Senior Sergeant Alvin Al Cook, an officer hardened by decades of service, was seen conversing in hushed tones with a figure that appeared at the end of the corridor during late-night evidence reviews. He later told Lena, "I don't know what that thing was, but its eyes, it looked like it was pleading for vengeance or forgiveness." I haven't been the same since. Danny began to piece together a harrowing pattern. Similar whispered cries echoed from abandoned sites, old crime scenes, and even in precinct basements where the blueprints of justice were drafted. It all led back to an unsolved case from years ago, the massacre in a derelict motel on the wrong side of town. A group of officers, handpicked for their valor, had been ambushed during what was supposed to be a routine raid. 5 officers lost their lives that night, and rumors of a cover-up had simmered ever since. Danny had been a rookie then, barely 23, and the event had seared itself into his memory. The ghostly figure in the mirror, could it be connected to those lost souls? Late one rain-soaked evening, as Danny sat reviewing the old case files in the cramped evidence locker beneath the station, Lena joined him. "I found something in the archives," she said, her voice as steady as ever despite the tremor of underlying dread. She slid a faded newspaper clipping across the table. The article detailed the motel massacre, naming the officers involved and hinting at internal investigations that had been hush-hush from the start. Danny's eyes traced the familiar names, names that he had silently mourned over the years. His stomach churned as he recalled that fateful night and the ghosts of his comrades who seemed to have never found peace. A sudden chill swept over the room, and the overhead fluorescent light buzzed and dimmed. A whisper, chillingly clear, floated past their ears. Justice. Retribution. Lena and Danny froze in unison. Lena's hand tightened around the clipping. "They're here," she murmured, asking for justice. It was as if the very souls of their fallen brothers had returned, urging the living to right a wrong that had been left unpunished. In the days that followed, the precinct became a battleground of memories and restless spirits. Danny teamed up with Lena to reopen the old case, a decision met with resistance from high-ranking officials who viewed it as reopening old wounds. But the officers on the street knew better. Something unholy had taken root within their ranks. Their nightly patrols were punctuated by inexplicable phenomena. One officer, while investigating a reported disturbance near the old motel, described an invisible force dragging him along an abandoned alley, his radio blaring cryptic pleas to remember us. Amid the growing unrest, Sergeant Cook gathered a meeting with the station's commanding officers in a dim conference room that smelled of stale coffee and regret. "We can't ignore what's happening," he pleaded, his gravelly voice echoing against the sterile walls. "Our station, our badge, it's not just a symbol of law and order. It's become a resting place for those we left behind." His eyes, heavy with unspoken horror, swept the room. "We need to reopen the investigation into the motel incident. We have to uncover the truth, or these ghosts will keep haunting us until every injustice is rectified." His words, laced with desperation, unsettled even the most skeptical among them. Danny and Lena took that mandate to heart. Late one night, under a storm of both rain and repressed memories, they returned to the motel, the site of the massacre that had forever altered the course of their careers. The building was little more than a crumbling facade, its walls saturated with the secrets of a forgotten tragedy. As they entered the abandoned structure, the heavy smell of decay and despair greeted them like an unwelcome phantom. In the flickering beam of their flashlights, they traced the layout of the building, following the faded footprints of once echoing footsteps. In what used to be the motel's main hall, a large mural still adorned the wall, a once proud depiction of community and safety, now defaced with graffiti and tears. As Danny ran his gloved fingers over the peeling paint, he noticed a series of initials and a date carved deep into the wood of an old reception desk. His heart pounded. "It's a message," he whispered, and Lena leaned in. The initials were those of one of the officers who had perished that dreadful night, a name that had been whispered about in locked chambers and hushed mourning for decades. Suddenly, the air shifted, and the temperature plummeted. From the shadows behind a torn velvet curtain, a spectral figure emerged. It was unmistakably one of the fallen officers, a man with sorrow etched into every line of his ghostly face. "You came back," the apparition said in a voice that vibrated with both grief and anger. "We were betrayed. We were abandoned." His words were a mix of accusation and plea. Danny's blood ran cold as he responded, "We're here now to set things right. Tell us what happened." The ghost's eyes flickered with a desperate intensity. "There was corruption, some of our own. We trusted them to protect us, but they led us to our demise." The spirit's voice wavered with anguish as he recounted a series of clandestine operations and hidden agendas that had doomed the brave officers. "Our spirits have never found rest. Our cries for help have echoed in these halls for far too long." Lena, visibly shaken, murmured, "Then we must bring this to light. We must honor your sacrifice." For hours, amid the oppressive gloom of the ruined motel, the ghost recounted every detail of that fateful night. The betrayal, the cover-up, and the lies that had been spun to bury the truth. With trembling determination, Danny recorded every word on his digital recorder, knowing that the evidence could finally expose the corruption that had haunted the department for so long. As the ghost's form began to wane with the approach of dawn, he left them with one final, chilling warning. "Beware, for the truth is a double-edged sword. The darkness you unearth may not remain buried simply by the light of day." Back at the precinct, the reopened investigation soon sparked shockwaves through the department. High-ranking officials, previously comfortable in their silence, found themselves under scrutiny. Sergeant Cook's impassioned pleas for justice resonated with many of the hard-bitten officers, and Danny and Lena's case file quickly became a rallying cry for truth seekers inside the force. But as the investigation progressed, a series of inexplicable occurrences continued to plague those involved. Files went missing from secured archives, shadows lingered too long in the corners of office hallways, and low, sorrowful murmurs echoed from empty rooms. One particularly chilling night, while Danny and Lena were going over the evidence in the evidence room, a heavy knock sounded at the door. Danny opened it to find an unfamiliar man in a faded police jacket, his badge tarnished and his eyes clouded with what looked like remorse. I'm Officer Malcolm Hayes," the man said softly, his voice trembling. "I was part of that operation, and I can't keep silent any longer." He looked between them, haunted, before continuing, "There were orders to let us fall. I've spent every night in remorse, haunted by the things I witnessed." His confession spilled out in broken sentences as the trio pored over old reports and unreleased evidence files, linking high-ranking officials to a network of corruption. As the web of conspiracies unraveled, a palpable sense of dread settled over the department. Danny found himself increasingly tormented by dreams of the fallen officers, visions in which their spectral forms roamed the precinct, their eyes accusing him of failing to protect their legacy. In one such nightmare, he heard their combined voices. "Justice is overdue." Their chorus echoed through his mind until dawn shattered the darkness with a harsh, unforgiving light. In a final act of defiance against the hidden forces that had manipulated their fate, Danny, Lena, and Officer Hayes organized a press conference to expose the sordid truths buried for so long. Standing at a hastily arranged podium outside the precinct on a rain-slick morning, Danny's voice wavered, but remained resolute as he detailed the grisly events of that fateful night, the subsequent cover-up, and the spectral warnings from the beyond. "We may have let down our brothers and sisters in the past," he said, his eyes reflecting both sorrow and determination, "but tonight we stand for truth, even if it means facing the ghosts of our own making." As the story broke across local media, the department braced itself for the inevitable fallout. Yet, in the days that followed, an almost imperceptible change came over the precinct. The oppressive incidents that had tormented their nights began to recede. The whispers in the dark corridors became less frequent. The restless specters of the fallen seemed to sense that their stories were finally being told. In the silence of the evidence room, where Danny sometimes sat alone reviewing the old case files by the dim light of a single desk lamp, he could almost feel the presence of the departed. A silent thank you, or perhaps a final farewell. Despite the official repercussions that rocked the force, the real transformation was internal. The officers, scarred yet emboldened by the harrowing truths they had unearthed, began a slow but deliberate journey towards redemption. They established new protocols for transparency and accountability, determined that no more souls, living or otherwise, would be sacrificed to the callous machinations of corruption. And though the city still whispered about unexplained lights in darkened corridors and forlorn voices in forgotten rooms, those were now seen as mournful echoes of a past injustice. Ghosts who, having finally found a measure of recognition, had begun to rest. In the quiet aftermath of the storm, as Detective Lena Ortiz walked the now peaceful halls of the precinct, she paused by the worn wooden desk where the digital recorder lay. Its battery had long since died, but the recording still held every anguished word from that long-ago night. With trembling fingers, she pressed play one final time. The ghostly confession, the sorrowful warning of a protector betrayed, filled the room, gentle yet potent in its message, that even in the darkness of a corrupted system, the quest for truth could illuminate the path to redemption. Officer Danny Ramirez, standing by her side, gazed out a grimy window as dawn broke over the city. In that quiet moment, both officers silently acknowledged that their work was far from over. They had unearthed a truth that transcended mortal law, a truth echoed by the voices of the departed, urging them to continue fighting for justice, for all those who had been forgotten. And so, beneath the watchful eyes of specters and the unwavering determination of the living, a new chapter began. The ghosts of past transgressions found solace in the promise of accountability, and the police force, forever marked by its haunted history, pressed onward, with the weight of guilt, the burden of memory, and the enduring hope that justice, however long in coming, would one day prevail.
Story number 4.
The sea was a merciless mistress that night, its dark, tumultuous waters swallowing every ray of moonlight. The research vessel Mariner's Hope cut through the waves, its bow slicing through churned water like a knife through silk. Dr. Evelyn Reed stood on the deck, mesmerized by the relentless pulse of the ocean. For her, the sea was both a sanctuary and a mystery, a vast repository of secrets waiting to be unearthed. But that night, those secrets were about to claw their way to the surface. Evelyn had joined the expedition to study peculiar marine life, yet whispers of strange occurrences in these depths had circulated among the crew long before their departure. Stories of inexplicable lights beneath the waves and eerie silhouettes darting below the surface were spoken of in low tones off-duty. Now, as thunder rumbled in the distance and the vessel rocked beneath her feet, those tales seemed all too real. At the helm stood Captain Jonathan Pierce, a grizzled man with decades of seafaring lore etched into his weather-beaten face. His eyes, as steely as the ship's anchors, never missed a detail. "Keep her steady," he ordered, his voice resonating with authority as he guided the Mariner's Hope through towering swells. His gaze met Evelyn's, and in that moment, the two shared an unspoken understanding this journey had already taken a dangerous turn. It began with an unusual reading on the sonar, a massive, undefined object drifting just beneath the vessel's hull. "Captain, you're going to want to see this," Evelyn called out to him in the control room, her voice trembling with a blend of scientific curiosity and dread. The rest of the crew gathered around the display, watching as the sonar image resolved into a dark, amorphous shape. It hovered motionless amidst the turbulent water, almost as if it were waiting. "What in hell is that?" Captain Pierce muttered, leaning in closer. The moment seemed to hang in the balance, the only sound the steady hum of the ship's engines and the soft lapping of waves against the hull. "It could be a derelict submersible," offered Lieutenant Mark Sanchez, a young officer with an insatiable appetite for adventure. His tone was more excited than concerned. "Maybe even a lost relic from a forgotten war." Evelyn frowned. "It doesn't match any submersible Dassault designs. Its dimensions, they're off the charts. And that pattern, it's too symmetrical, too deliberate." She tapped at the screen, zooming in on what now appeared to be intricate markings along the object's surface. The markings twisted in spirals and curves, reminiscent of ancient symbols weathered by time. Tension thickened as Captain Pierce gave the order to change course. "Bring us closer, but proceed with extreme caution," he commanded. The vessel's engines responded, and slowly, like a beast stalking its prey, the Mariner's Hope advanced toward the mysterious object. As they approached, a sudden gust of wind slapped the side of the ship, and the ocean's fury intensified. The object, now visible to the naked eye, revealed itself to be an enormous, rusted structure, an incongruous combination of corroded metal and organic residue that defied conventional explanation. It looked almost like a massive door, half buried in silt, with carvings that glowed faintly under the phosphorescent sheen of deep-sea life. "Step lightly now," Captain Pierce warned, his voice low and serious. "We're entering territory that no man should dare." Evelyn and Mark donned their diving gear, joining a small team that was scheduled to investigate the anomaly in a tethered submersible. The vessel was cramped but functional, a metal capsule designed to withstand the crushing depths of the ocean. As the hatch closed behind them, a heavy silence settled over the team. The world outside shrank to a blur of darkness and shifting luminescence. The submersible descended slowly, its floodlights piercing the water's gloom. The pressure increased, rattling the metal walls in a way that reminded them all of the ocean's relentless grasp. Then, as they neared the object, their lights caught sight of something impossible. Along the structure's surface, faint outlines of figures seemed to move, as if etched in the metal or perhaps the residue that obscured it. They moved in silent, tortuous patterns that resembled dances choreographed by despair. "Do you see that?" Mark whispered into his microphone, his voice betraying awe and terror in equal measure. "Yes," replied Evelyn, her eyes widening as she scrutinized the markings. "Those aren't natural patterns. They're deliberate, as if someone or something was trying to tell us a story." Her scientific mind raced to correlate the symbols with any known language or ritual, yet nothing clicked into place. Back on the vessel, Captain Pierce and the remaining crew monitored the dive. The storm raged overhead, and rain pounded the deck in relentless sheets of water. Every splash of the surf against the hull sounded like a drumbeat heralding impending doom. The captain's jaw tightened as he watched the descent, knowing that the ocean guarded its secrets with a ferocity that was nearly legendary. Suddenly, a sharp crack of static blared from the submersible's communication system. Evelyn's face went pale as the feed began to break up. "Captain, we're picking up voices. It sounds like chanting, low, guttural, and inhuman." Her words were edged with an emotion that was part fascination, part horror. "Repeat that, Evelyn," Captain Pierce said, his eyes fixed on the sonar. "I want to hear every word." Before she could comply, the entire submersible shuddered violently, its lights flickering. The team exchanged terrified glances. "What the hell was that?" one of the divers murmured as they steadied themselves. Outside, the mysterious structure loomed even closer, its carvings pulsing with an unnatural rhythm. As if in response to the voices, bioluminescent organisms in the water swirled around it, creating a living corona of light and shadow. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, the object began to move. It slid slowly from the seabed as if buoyed by a hidden force, ascending toward the submersible. Panic surged in the cramped vessel. "We're being pulled," Mark shouted. "Initiate emergency ascent." His voice was frantic. The submersible's controls responded, and the capsule began a rapid, uncontrolled climb. The once crystal-clear water turned into a vortex of swirling debris and fractal shadows. Above them, on the deck of Mariner's Hope, the captain's expression was stoic but troubled. "Hold on," he ordered through the radio, his tone a mix of resolve and deep-seated dread. But even he could not shake the feeling that whatever was coming had been waiting for them all along. Inside the submersible, time seemed to stretch thin. Every second was filled with a cacophony of sounds. The roar of the ocean, the frantic beeping of instruments, and now the haunting chant, louder and more insistent. "It's calling to us," Evelyn managed to say between gasps, her voice echoing in the sterile metal confines. "Listen, you can almost understand it. It says, 'Return what is mine.'" Before anyone could react, a violent jolt rocked the vessel. The submersible shuddered as if struck by an unseen hand. The lights went out, plunging everyone into an abyss of darkness, broken only by the glow of emergency indicators. Then, with a force that tore through the hull, the object collided with the submersible, sending it spinning in a vortex of chaos. Alarms shrieked, and the team was tossed about like ragdolls in a tempest. In that heart-stopping moment, Evelyn's mind raced through a maelstrom of terror and determination. "We have to get out! Now!" she cried, struggling to stabilize the controls as the submersible's structural integrity groaned under the strain. Mark frantically checked the escape hatch, his hands trembling as the pressure gauge spiked. Through the crackling communications channel came a distorted voice. "You were warned. The debt must be repaid." The words were laced with menace, an echo from a time long buried beneath waves and sorrow. The voice repeated, a dirge that sent ice running through their veins. Moments later, the emergency ascent was complete. The submersible burst through the water's surface, the vessel of Mariner's Hope coming into view, shrouded in mist and rain. The divers clutched at each other as the capsule hit the deck with a jarring thud. There, on the rain-soaked deck, Captain Pierce and his loyal crew awaited their return with a mixture of relief and foreboding. The storm's roar seemed to mock their narrow escape, as if nature itself were chastising them for daring to pry into the ocean's forbidden depths. Once aboard, with trembling hands and haunted eyes, Evelyn recounted the surreal events to the gathered crew in the dim light of the ship's galley. "We found something out there, a relic, some kind of ancient construct that defied explanation, and it was accompanied by chants, voices from the deep, pleading and vengeful." Her voice broke as she added, "It felt as though it was calling out to reclaim something it had lost long ago." Captain Pierce's gaze was fixed on the tumultuous sea beyond the window, his expression inscrutable. "The ocean is ancient, full of secrets. Some are better left undisturbed," he said quietly, echoing an old mariner's wisdom. "Perhaps we awaken something best forgotten." His words fell heavy on the assembled crew, mingling with the hum of the ship's engines and the relentless pulse of the waves. Over the following days, as the Mariner's Hope limped back toward port under steadily clearing skies, reports of inexplicable occurrences began to surface among the crew. Crew members spoke of waking in the dead of night to find mysterious symbols drawn in salt on the decks, and one watchman claimed he saw a figure, draped in seaweed and sorrow, standing at the bow, gazing out at the endless abyss. The incident that sent the chills through everyone, however, occurred during a routine night watch. Lieutenant Sanchez was on duty when he heard a soft, rhythmic knocking at his cabin door. "Open up," he demanded, his voice steady despite the knot of fear tightening in his gut. The knob rattled, then turned slowly, as if by an unseen hand. When the door creaked open, no one was there, only the muted sound of the ocean, now eerily calm, and a single scrap of paper taped to the door. On it, written in an intricate, archaic script, were the words, "Return what is mine." The chilling message sparked an investigation among the crew. Most dismissed it as a prank born of stress and superstition. Yet those who had been in the submersible, including Evelyn and Mark, knew better. They had heard the voice, felt its wrath, and witnessed the object that defied nature. Every night thereafter, the whispers of the deep seemed to follow them, a constant reminder of a debt unpaid. Back in port, as the Mariner's Hope was ferried into the harbor, Evelyn found herself unable to shake the feeling of being pursued by unseen eyes. The coastal fog had rolled in like a living thing, blanketing the city in a melancholy shroud. Local fishermen talked of odd occurrences at sea, a mournful wailing carried by the tide, ships that vanished without a trace, and legends of sunken treasures cursed by malevolent spirits. Evelyn listened to their hushed voices and felt a kinship in the shared dread. The realization that beneath the ocean's vast, placid surface lurked horrors that transcended human understanding. Determined to piece together the mystery, Evelyn spent sleepless nights poring over maritime records and ancient folklore. She discovered references to a long-forgotten maritime cult, worshippers of a deity known only as Thalassos, who believed that the ocean was a living entity that exacted retribution on those who dared exploit its bounty. According to fragmented texts, Thalassos demanded a sacrifice, a piece of what was once taken from the deep. The mysterious object encountered by the Mariner's Hope began to take on a new, terrifying significance. It was not merely an object, it was a marker, a relic imbued with a curse that spanned centuries. In a desperate bid to salvage their lives and sanity, Captain Pierce called a meeting in the ship's worn mess hall. "We are not just dealing with the unknown," he began, his voice low and resonant. "We have stirred something ancient, a force that demands balance. It seems that our intrusion has been recorded, and there is a price to be paid." His eyes, sharp and unwavering, scanned the faces of his crew. "We must return what was taken from these depths or suffer consequences we can scarcely imagine." The crew looked to each other with a mixture of despair and resignation. Among them, Mark's eyes burned with a restless determination. "How do we return it, Captain? We barely know what it is, where it came from, or what we're up against." His voice was both defiant and desperate, echoing the sentiment of every soul aboard the vessel. Captain Pierce sighed heavily, the weight of his years and his experiences evident in his furrowed brow. "That I cannot say with certainty, but legends old as the sea itself speak of a ritual, a return to the origin of the curse. We must consult those who have dedicated their lives to understanding the lore of the ocean. There is a coastal village, isolated and forgotten by time, where the descendants of those ancient mariners still keep the old ways alive. We must seek their guidance." With heavy hearts and grim resolve, the crew prepared to set sail for that village, a place rumored to exist only in whispered legends and faded maps. As the Mariner's Hope glided into the harbor one final time, Evelyn couldn't help but feel that the true test of their courage was yet to come. The storm had passed, but the scars of that fateful encounter remained, etched into the souls of those who had dared look into the abyss. In the days that followed, the village revealed its secrets with a morbid, almost ritualistic clarity. The villagers, weathered by a lifetime of coexistence with the capricious sea, spoke of Thalassos with reverence and dread. "He takes what's his in due time," an old fisherman intoned, his voice creaking like the hull of an ancient boat. "If you have disturbed his realm, you must return the tribute, or face endless torment." Evelyn, Captain Pierce, and a small delegation from the crew listened intently as a local priestess explained the ritual required to appease the ancient deity. "You must venture to the place where the sea meets the sky, a deep fissure in the reef, marked by stone pillars older than man, and cast into its depths the object you have taken. Only then will Thalassos grant you mercy." Her words were delivered with such solemnity that even the wind seemed to pause in deference. The journey toward the fissure was fraught with peril, as the ocean continued to exhibit its capricious temperament. Storm clouds gathered in a final, ominous assembly, and the waves pounded against the hull with an anger that mirrored the gods of old. Yet, through the relentless barrage of nature's fury, the crew pressed on, driven by the need to atone for their transgression. At last, they arrived at the fabled reef, a narrow, jagged chasm jutting from the ocean floor like a scar across the earth. The object, safely secured in a watertight container on the deck, beckoned with a faint, otherworldly glow that pulsed in time with the rhythm of the sea. With trembling hands and hearts laden with guilt and hope, Captain Pierce readied the container for its final descent into the abyss. "I've spent my life fighting the fury of this ocean," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the roar of the surf. "But tonight, I must face its wrath not as an adversary, but as a penitent." His eyes met those of Evelyn, who nodded in silent solidarity, her determination unbroken despite the terror that threatened to overwhelm her. As the container was slowly lowered over the edge of the reef, the skies above seemed to split open with a divine intensity. For a few excruciating moments, time itself appeared to suspend as the object descended into the churning waters below. Then, as if in answer to their final plea, the storm abated. The ocean's tumultuous roar was replaced by an eerie calm. The waves smoothed into gentle undulations that bore the remnants of a furious past. In that charged silence, a low, resonant sound emanated from the depths, a sound that vibrated not just through the water, but through every fiber of the crew's being. It was a sound of sorrow and release, of a debt repaid over the endless expanse of time. For a heartbeat, the crew stared at the spot where the container disappeared, and then, one by one, they felt a weight lift from their souls. Evelyn exhaled slowly, her eyes reflecting both relief and lingering terror. "Did we do it?" she asked softly, more to herself than anyone else. The priestess, her face serene yet etched with the wisdom of centuries, replied simply, "The ocean's justice is now balanced. But remember, its depths hold memories that can never be forgotten." Captain Pierce stepped forward, his voice steady despite the tumult within. "We have seen the true face of the ocean tonight, a force of nature capable of both creation and destruction. Let us carry this lesson with us, and may we always respect the power that lies beneath its shimmering surface." His words, spoken over the gentle lapping of waves, resonated with a quiet finality that echoed in every heart present. Weeks later, as the crew of the Mariner's Hope disembarked and returned to the familiar rhythms of life on shore, they found themselves forever changed by the ordeal. The ocean's mysteries had left an indelible mark on their souls, a reminder that some secrets are best left beneath the waves. Evelyn's research took on a new direction, one that balanced scientific inquiry with reverence for the ancient forces of nature. Captain Pierce, for his part, never again took the calm of the sea for granted, each sunrise a precious gift, after nights spent with the wrath of the deep etched into memory. Every now and then, as the tide rolled in and the gulls cried overhead, the crew would catch a glimpse of something in the distance, a shadow beneath the surface, or a faint glimmer just out of sight, and they would exchange a knowing look. It was a silent acknowledgement of what they had experienced, a secret shared among those who dared to confront the ocean's darkest depths and returned changed. And in quiet moments, when the wind carried just the right note, they could almost hear that ancient chant, the echo of a debt repaid, a warning, and a promise that the ocean would always remember.
Story number 5.
The night was ink black and heavy with silence as the battered sedan rumbled along the lonely stretch of highway. Inside, 3 friends, Mia, Jordan, and Travis, sat huddled close, their conversation punctuated by the rhythmic thrum of the engine and the occasional whisper of wind outside. They had set out on a long-awaited road trip to escape the burdens of daily life and to explore the forgotten backroads of the American heartland. What they didn't know was that the route they chose had a notorious reputation, one fueled by urban legends and whispered warnings from locals. As the headlights carved through the darkness, an unsettling feeling crept over them, a sense that the road itself was alive, watching and waiting. Mia's eyes darted to the passenger window. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. The others exchanged uneasy glances as a distant, metallic clank echoed through the car. Jordan scoffed, trying to reassure her. It's just the old bridge ahead. They say its structure creaks like a ghostly chorus when the wind is right. Travis, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter, added, Yeah, but I've never felt like we were being followed. His tone was low, laced with an emotion he couldn't quite hide. The road wound through patches of dense forest, where bare trees loomed like silent sentinels against the night sky. Every so often, a flicker of a streetlight or a glimpse of a weathered sign startled them. They passed one sign that read Devil's Crossing, 5 miles, and the car's occupants felt an inexplicable shudder pass through them. In the rearview mirror, the dark expanse behind them seemed to pulse with an eerie life of its own, as if unseen eyes were watching their every move. As they pushed on, the conversation faltered and was replaced by anxious silence. The hum of the engine filled the void as miles melted away under the wheels. Suddenly, Travis's radio crackled to life with a burst of static before a voice emerged. Turn back now. Turn back now. The message was distorted, overlapping with hissing and mechanical interference. Mia jumped, nearly spilling her water bottle while Jordan slammed his hand on the console. "Who's that?" he demanded over the noise. The radio fell silent, leaving nothing but a lingering tension and the echo of those desperate words. They decided to stop at a small, rundown gas station a few miles later, the one place where civilization peeked through the dense blanket of wilderness. The neon sign flickered erratically, casting disjointed shadows on the cracked pavement. The attendant, a gaunt man with eyes like hollow windows, greeted them with a rasp that sounded both friendly and mournful. "Long night out there?" he asked, his voice betraying a wariness that seemed to come from decades of witnessing horrors along that very road. Travis attempted to make polite conversation while refueling. "Yeah, we're just on a road trip," he said, trying to laugh off his own apprehension. But the attendant only smiled thinly and leaned in. "You kids best be careful. The road's got a hunger for souls," he murmured before disappearing into the back office. Mia exchanged a worried glance with Jordan, and they both shuddered at the cryptic remark. Back on the road, their tension seemed to mount. The landscape grew more desolate and the trees denser, as if nature itself were conspiring to isolate them. They talked little, each lost in their thoughts and the oppressive silence of the night. The radio remained mute, and the only sound was the relentless drumming of their tires on the cracked asphalt and the occasional whisper of the wind. Hours passed when the car's headlights illuminated an old abandoned service station off the highway. Its faded sign, Phantom's Rest, hung crookedly by one rusted hinge. Mia's heart clenched. "I swear, I've seen this place before," she said in a voice barely above a whisper. Jordan frowned. "Maybe in a movie," he offered uncertainly, but the unease in his eyes was unmistakable. Travis, however, was determined to break the mounting dread. "Let's stop and check it out," he suggested, a defiant edge in his tone as if to challenge the encroaching darkness. It might be a good spot to rest. Reluctantly, they pulled off onto the gravel lot. The service station was cloaked in shadow, its windows dark, and its structure crumbling as though nature had begun reclaiming it. The trio parked the car near the entrance and stepped out into the cold night. As they approached, a damp chill seeped into their bones. A wind stirred through the overgrown weeds, carrying with it the faint scent of decay and something else, a whisper of regret. Inside, the building was eerie and desolate. Dust motes danced in the slivers of moonlight that managed to sneak through broken windows. The silence here felt absolute, as if each step they took disturbed the long-held silence of secrets. Mia's footsteps echoed down the deserted counter hall, and suddenly from somewhere deep within the service station came a slow, deliberate voice. "Why have you come?" it asked. The voice was hauntingly melodic, but laden with sorrow and a chilling authority. Jordan froze. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice trembling as the sound seemed to emanate from every corner of the room at once. No answer came, only the unsettling creak of the old building. Travis, grabbing a flashlight from a dusty shelf, swept its beam around. In a far corner where the shadows seemed to pool, they spotted a figure. A gaunt man in a tattered uniform, his eyes dark and his face drawn in anguish. He spoke again, his tone pleading yet accusatory. "You must not disturb what lies beneath or suffer the consequences." His words resonated with an otherworldly echo that reverberated around the empty building. Mia's heart pounded as she whispered, "What did you do, sir? What lies beneath?" The ghost's thin lips parted as if he were about to recount a tragic tale, but before he could speak again, the lights flickered violently. The man's form wavered and seemed to dissolve into thin air, leaving behind nothing but a lingering chill that prickled their skin. Shaken, the three friends fled back to the car, their minds racing with incomprehensible questions. Travis urged them onward, insisting that they couldn't let fear make prisoners of them on a simple road trip. Yet none of them could shake the impression that the abandoned station was not merely a relic of a forgotten past, but a doorway to something dark and unresolved. The journey resumed with an unspoken understanding that every mile carried with it the weight of that cryptic encounter. The highway became their lifeline and their tormentor in equal measure. They passed through desolate towns and winding byways where the silence felt nearly oppressive. At one point, they stopped at a roadside diner, a small neon-lit refuge that promised a brief respite from the haunting journey. The diner's windows were fogged, and the inside glowed with a sickly yellow light, as if filtered through a veil of decay. Inside, the air smelled of old coffee and regret. An elderly waitress, her expression blank and her eyes sad, slid over a menu with trembling hands. "You all look like you've seen a ghost," she said softly, almost apologetically. Travis, attempting to regain his composure, laughed nervously. "Maybe we have," he said, and for a moment, the corners of her mouth twitched into a semblance of a smile as though she knew far more than she dared reveal. Jordan, unable to contain his anxiety, leaned forward. "What do you know about this road?" he asked quietly. The waitress's eyes darkened and the jukebox in the corner fell silent. "There's history here," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "They say the road was built over old burial grounds, that the very asphalt is stained with the sorrows of forgotten souls. Travelers have vanished, and some who return are never the same." Her words, delivered in a tone that was more matter-of-fact than superstitious, sent shivers down their spines. When they finally left the diner, night had deepened even further. The car's interior was heavy with the ghosts of their recent experiences, and an eerie tension pervaded every conversation. As they drove, the radio once again burst into static, this time accompanied by the faint murmur of indistinct voices. "Return, return, return," the voices repeated in a chorus that was both mournful and menacing. Mia reached for the dial, desperate to find clarity amidst the noise, but the interference persisted as if some unseen force was deliberately broadcasting its sorrow. Travis's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel as he steered onto a long, seemingly endless stretch of road bordered by towering cypress trees draped in Spanish moss. The trees swayed rhythmically in the breeze, their shapes contorting into grotesque silhouettes under the moonlight. Suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, Travis saw something moving along the roadside, a solitary figure standing in the middle of nowhere. "Did you see that?" he demanded, voice brittle with apprehension. Jordan squinted through the windshield, trying to adjust his eyes to the darkness. "Probably just a drifter," he replied, though his tone lacked conviction. Yet, as they passed, the figure remained motionless, impossibly still against the backdrop of rustling trees. When the car receded into the distance, a low, sorrowful sigh floated on the wind, a sound that could have been mistaken for the lament of the departed. Their apprehension mounted with each mile until, eventually, exhaustion forced them to pull over at an isolated rest stop. The station was a solitary building in a vast field, its facade crumbling and its sign swaying in the wind. Seeking shelter for the night, they decided to set up camp near the building, hoping that a few hours of sleep would restore their shaken nerves before the next leg of the journey. Around a small campfire, the three friends tried to put the day's horrors behind them. The flames flickered hungrily as they attempted to share stories, a coping mechanism to dispel the mounting dread. Jordan, ever the skeptic, recounted a tale of a lost traveler who encountered a phantom hitchhiker on a similar road, his voice growing animated in the flickering light. "They say she appears on lonely highways pleading for a ride, only to vanish without a trace when you try to help her," he said. Mia shuddered, glancing around as if expecting to see a spectral figure in the darkness. Travis, however, remained silent, his eyes fixed on the inky void beyond the fire's glow. After a while, as the night deepened and the temperature dropped, a sudden rustling sound from the nearby woods broke the fragile calm. The friends exchanged tense looks, their minds racing with possibilities. Out of the darkness came a shape, a gaunt, nearly skeletal figure that moved with surprising speed toward their small circle of light. "Who's there?" Mia called out, voice wavering. The figure paused, and in a gravely pained tone it replied, "I'm lost. I'm so lost. Help me." Its eyes were hollow and filled with an anguish that struck at the heart, and its voice seemed to carry the weight of centuries of sorrow. Travis instinctively reached for his phone to call for help, but the figure spoke again before he could dial. "You shouldn't be here. This road carries curses," it rasped, each word heavy with despair and warning. "Every step taken on this path binds you closer to the fate of those who cannot escape." The campfire flickered as if on the verge of being snuffed out, and for several agonizing seconds, silence reigned between them as each friend grappled with the gravity of the apparition's words. Finally, Jordan broke the silence. "What do you want from us?" he asked, his voice low and cautious. The figure's gaze turned toward him, and it answered, "I want you to remember and to heed the warnings of the past. Save yourselves from repeating our mistakes." With that, it backed away slowly, fading into the darkness until it was nothing more than a wisp of sorrow carried by the wind. Unable to shake the encounter from their minds, the trio slept fitfully under the skeletal remains of a dead oak. Dawn arrived reluctantly, casting a pale light over the desolate rest stop. The road ahead beckoned, a road paved with uncertainties and haunted memories. With heavy hearts and lingering fear, they resumed their journey, each mile etched with the indelible marks of that harrowing night. For the remainder of the road trip, strange occurrences continued to plague them. Shadows lurked at the edges of their vision, and disembodied whispers seemed to follow them from one lonely stretch of highway to another. When they took a wrong turn near an old, dilapidated cemetery, Mia swore she saw figures moving among the tombstones, their eyes glimmering with silent warnings. Jordan's skepticism was slowly eroded by the mounting evidence that what they were experiencing was more than mere imagination. One fateful night, as they navigated a notorious stretch of the highway known simply as the Devil's Backbone, the sedan's engine sputtered and died, leaving them stranded in the midst of a dense fog that swallowed the road. Panic set in as they realized there was no sign of help, just the impenetrable white mist and the unsettling feeling that something was lurking just beyond the veil of visibility. Travis tried restarting the car to no avail, and with trembling resolve, they decided to leave the vehicle and seek help on foot. The cold fog clung to their skin as they trudged along the desolate road, their flashlights barely piercing the gloom. Every crunch of gravel underfoot sounded unnaturally loud, and every distant sound became amplified by their rising fear. Suddenly, in the distance, a feeble light emerged, a roadside lantern swinging gently in the breeze. It was an isolated farmhouse, its silhouette gaunt against the swirling fog. Desperate and shivering, they made their way toward the light, hoping for refuge. At the farmhouse, an elderly woman answered the door with wary eyes. "You're far from home, aren't you?" she asked, her voice soft yet edged with an indefinable sorrow. "Come in," she said, stepping aside to allow them entry. Inside, the farmhouse was furnished with relics of bygone days, old photographs, faded quilts, and the lingering aroma of herbs and incense. Over a meager supper of stew and bread, the woman spoke in hushed tones about the history of the road. "This land is cursed," she confided. "Many have traveled that path and met terrible ends. The spirits of those who perished roam the highway, seeking absolution and remembrance." Her words resonated with the same warnings they had encountered on their journey. Jordan couldn't help but ask, "What do we do to break free of this curse?" The woman's eyes grew glassy with melancholy as she replied, "Only by acknowledging and honoring the past can the cycle be broken. Carry their stories, let their voices be heard, and never forget that the road remembers." The night wore on, and as the group prepared to leave the farmhouse the next morning, an unsettling silence had settled over them. They said their thanks, but as they stepped outside, the fog had thickened once again, blanketing the world in a suffocating shroud. The path ahead seemed more treacherous than ever, and their encounter with the old woman lingered in their thoughts like a persistent specter. Over the following days, as the road trip neared its end and the highway slowly led them back to the bright lights of civilization, the eerie events began to subside. Yet the memory of that cursed journey, the spectral warnings, and the tragic faces of those lost souls left an indelible mark on their hearts. Each of them carried the weight of a story that demanded remembrance, a story that they would one day share with others, not as a tale of simple misfortune, but as a warning of the road's hidden terrors. In the weeks that followed, long after the tires had left the haunted highways and the unsettling echoes had faded into memory, the trio found themselves forever changed. Mia took to journaling every detail of the journey, her writings a testament to the fragile boundary between the known and the unknown. Jordan, whose skepticism had nearly crumbled under the weight of the inexplicable, found solace in becoming an advocate for local legends and ghost stories, stories that carried truths often dismissed by modern minds. Travis, forever haunted by the flickering image of that gaunt figure in the fog, resolved to never again take a well-trodden path for granted. Years later, when asked about the road trip that altered their lives, they would recount the journey with voices trembling yet resolute. That road wasn't just asphalt and trees, Mia would say softly. It was a reminder that behind every mile lies a secret, one that we must treat with respect. Jordan would add, every traveler is bound by the memories of those who came before, and if we listen closely, the road speaks to us of our shared fate. Travis, staring into the distance as if searching for lost memories, would conclude, I still hear that whisper, that haunting call to return what was once lost. And every time I drive past a lonely stretch of road, I feel it, reminding me never to forget. On quiet nights, when the wind moaned through the trees and the highway's distant silhouette flickered in the half-light, they would sometimes catch a glimpse, a shadow moving across the landscape, or a flash of pale light in the depths of the fog. And in those moments, they knew the road was still alive, still remembering, still mourning. The road trip had been more than an escape. It was a communion with the past, a dialogue with the spirits that roamed the backroads in search of justice and a place to call home. And so, as they eventually parted ways, each carrying their own burdens and a newfound reverence for the secrets hidden in the dark recesses of forgotten highways, they promised to keep the stories alive. They understood that some journeys were meant not to lead back to normalcy, but to transform the traveler into a storyteller, a guardian of ghostly memories, a keeper of warnings that might one day save another wandering soul from the curse of a haunted road. In the end, the road had done more than take them through haunted stretches of asphalt and shadow. It had shown them that the most terrifying journeys were not those fought with brute force or armed resistance, but those fought within, the struggle to accept that some roads, some stories, and some souls are never truly laid to rest. And as the memory of that long, foreboding journey etched itself into the tapestry of their lives, they carried with them a silent vow, never to take a simple road trip for granted again.
Story number 6.
Late one autumn evening in a small town on the edge of nowhere, the fluorescent glare of the massive Walmart beckoned like a beacon to the weary and the curious. For most shoppers, it was simply another trip for groceries or gadgets. But for a select few who worked within its labyrinthine corridors during the overnight shift, it was a place where everyday retail life merged with an undercurrent of dread and unspeakable secrets. Marcus, a seasoned overnight security guard with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much, pulled up in his aging pickup truck, parked in the lot as the neon sign buzzed overhead. It was his third week on the night shift, and even though he had worked at the store before, this shift, on this particular night, sent a shiver down his spine. There was something off about the silence that lingered like a heavy fog inside the store after closing hours. Walking through the automatic glass doors, Marcus was greeted by the familiar hum of refrigerators and the soft drone of the vending machines. Yet, as he strolled past the aisles, ensuring that every section was dark and empty, an oppressive atmosphere seemed to settle over him. The store lights flickered intermittently, casting erratic shadows on walls lined with cheerful advertisements that now looked sinister in their distorted shapes. At exactly midnight, Marcus decided to make his routine round, checking every corner of the sprawling space. His footsteps echoed in the cavernous aisles of discount clothing and electronics until he reached the far end of the store, where a section dedicated to seasonal items stood. This area always had an eerie vibe, rows of plastic decorations and expired novelty items that seemed abandoned long before the holiday season had even started. There, near a display of old, dusty mannequins and faded banners, Marcus noticed something that made him stop cold. A figure, partially obscured by a stack of unsold merchandise, was standing motionless. The figure was dressed in an outdated Walmart uniform, a faded blue polo shirt and khakis, the name tag barely legible. Its head was tilted downward as if in endless sorrow or searching for something lost. Marcus blinked, certain he was merely imagining things after a long shift, but as he drew closer, the figure slowly turned its head upward. "Hello?" Marcus called out tentatively, his voice echoing unnervingly. The figure did not speak, but instead fixed him with hollow, distant eyes that glowed faintly in the low light. Before Marcus could react, the figure vanished behind a shelf, leaving behind nothing but the unsettling sound of the air conditioner buzzing irregularly. His pulse quickened. He knew Walmart as well as anyone. Employees were not expected to wander the aisles in dead shifts like this, and this apparition wasn't one of them. Marcus retreated to the security office, a cramped room at the back of the store that overlooked the main floor on a bank of monitors. He sat down heavily in the worn swivel chair and turned on the feed from the overhead cameras. Channel after channel revealed nothing out of the ordinary. Empty aisles, quiet registers, and stacks of merchandise neatly arranged. Yet, as he rewound the footage from the aisle in question, his heart skipped a beat. There, in the grainy black and white image, was the faint outline of the same figure, drifting slowly as if caught in a slow-motion dance with the unseen forces of the night. The timestamp read 12:03 a.m. Disquiet gnawed at him. Was it a prank? Some trick of the light or a glitch in the system? Marcus's logical mind waged war with the primal fear that whispered in his ear. This wasn't normal. He decided to check the area again. Grabbing his flashlight and an old service key, he walked back into the depths of the store, his footsteps measured and heavy on the polished floor. He reached the seasonal aisle once more. Every promotional poster and shelf seemed to watch him. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by the faint hum of the refrigeration units. As he moved toward the shelf where he had seen the apparition, a cold draft brushed his neck. Then he heard it, a soft, almost inaudible murmur that didn't match any sound he'd recognized from the building's mechanical rhythm. "Leave now." The voice was not loud, but it carried an authority that froze Marcus in place. He fumbled for his flashlight, and as its beam danced across the cluttered shelves, he saw, there, by the back corner of the aisle, a trail of footprints in the dust. They were not footprints of a person in motion. They were deliberate, as if someone had been pacing slowly, dragging feet in a ritualistic pattern. Marcus followed the footprints with his gaze, his heart hammering. They led him to a poorly lit storage room, one that was usually locked for inventory purposes. Inside the cramped room, boxes and abandoned displays of overstock lay in tangled heaps. Along one wall, Marcus discovered a hastily scrawled note. "They are here. They watch. Do not trust the shadows." The note was scrawled in jagged, almost frantic handwriting. His mind raced. Who could have left it? Was it connected to the apparition? Anxiety mixed with professional duty compelled him to secure the room and call his supervisor, but his trembling hands made it difficult to dial the number on his radio. Instead, he radioed in a quick message. "This is Marcus. I've found something in storage. Come check aisle 12. Static hissed in response. Moments later, a stern voice came over the radio. "Marcus, are you alone? Get back to the office immediately." The voice was unmistakably that of Linda, the night supervisor with a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency. But Marcus knew he hadn't done anything to warrant leaving the evidence behind. Instead, he insisted, "Linda, I've seen something. There's a figure in a uniform, and I found a note. You need to come see this." There was a brief pause. Then Linda replied with a warning tone, "Marcus, I'm on my way. Do not engage further until I arrive." With that, the line went silent. Marcus remained in the storage room, the oppressive presence of the note and the inexplicable environment weighing on him. Every creak and groan of the building sounded like distant footsteps coming closer. He thought back to the countless rumors he had heard over the years from other late-night employees, tales of strange happenings in Walmart during off hours, whispers of lost souls wandering the aisles after closing, of mysterious figures that appeared and disappeared without warning. He had dismissed those as urban legends until tonight, when reality blurred with myth. The minutes stretched on endlessly until Linda finally arrived. Her expression was a mix of skepticism and concern as she examined the note and listened to Marcus recount his experience. "I've heard the stories," Linda admitted quietly, her voice low, "but I never thought they were real." As if on cue, the overhead lights flickered once again, plunging the storage room momentarily into darkness. When the lights stabilized, Linda's eyes widened. At the far end of the room, partially behind a stack of cardboard boxes, stood the same gaunt figure in the old Walmart uniform. Its presence was eerie, an apparition that seemed to hover slightly above the ground, its eyes empty yet pleading. "Who are you?" Linda demanded, her voice barely concealing a mixture of authority and trembling fear. The figure's response was a slow, broken whisper that echoed off the walls. "I never left," it said, its tone laced with regret. "I was left behind." The apparition's voice seemed to carry not only sorrow but a warning of years of neglect and abuse, a soul trapped by circumstances beyond mortal control. Linda tried to advance, but as soon as she moved, the figure melted into the darkness, leaving behind only the lingering echo of its mournful lament. Determined to understand what was happening, Linda and Marcus decided to review the store's incident logs and maintenance records, hoping to find a clue in the archive of the store's history. In the back office, among piles of outdated forms and computer files that seldom saw daylight, they uncovered a history of a long-forgotten Walmart employee named Richard Miller. According to a faded document, Richard had worked at the store decades ago, a low-level stock clerk who was known for being unusually soft-spoken and dedicated. Tragedy struck when a warehouse accident claimed his life on an especially busy Saturday night. The official records had closed the case as an unfortunate mishap, and in the rush to open the store's new branch, his death was buried under a mountain of red tape and corporate indifference. Linda's voice dropped to a whisper as she recounted, "Richard Miller disappeared on the job, and they never properly mourned him. It seems some part of him never got the closure he deserved." Marcus's face grew pale. "So you're saying his ghost, if it is a ghost, is still here, trapped between shifts?" he asked, half in disbelief, half in grim realization. Before they could delve further, the building's PA system crackled to life unexpectedly, breaking the silence with a distorted announcement. "All overnight personnel, please report to the main entrance immediately." The announcement was unnervingly calm, as if the store itself was orchestrating this moment. Linda and Marcus exchanged uneasy looks and made their way to the front of the store. In the deserted aisles, they encountered a small group of other night shift workers, each looking as haunted as the next. Their eyes wide with shock and whispers of unexplained phenomena murmured among them. At the main entrance, standing amid the soft hum of broken-down speakers, was a figure clad in a Walmart vest, a younger employee named Carla who'd been working in electronics. Her hands trembled as she handed Linda a crumpled piece of paper. "I found this in the Lost and Found," she said in a quavering voice. The note was similar in style to the one Marcus had found, its frantic script scrawled across the paper. "Remember me, don't forget." Linda took the note and stared at it, her eyes reflecting the weight of its message. The group began discussing their own inexplicable experiences. The sudden, inexplicable cold spots in electronics aisles, brief flashes of reflections in polished surfaces showing figures that shouldn't be there, and the eerie sound of footsteps trailing just behind them when no one was around. They all recalled that one time when the store's intercom inexplicably played a distorted version of a funeral dirge in the dead of night. Each story added another thread to the tapestry of a haunting narrative that none could ignore. Determined to put an end to these disturbances once and for all, Linda organized an impromptu meeting with the store manager, a stern man named Greg, who prided himself on efficiency and a no-nonsense attitude. Greg arrived with an air of skepticism, dismissing the chatter as overactive imaginations fueled by isolation. "We're a corporation, not a theater for ghost stories," he chided, though his voice betrayed a trace of uncertainty when Linda presented the historical records of Richard Miller's death. That night, as the clock struck 2 a.m., Greg agreed to supervise one final night shift patrol. Linda, Marcus, Carla, and a reluctant Greg set out with flashlights and handheld radios through the maze of aisles, intent on finding the source of the disturbances. They divided into pairs, agreeing to meet back in the security office in 1 hour. The corridors of the store took on an oppressive stillness. the usual hum of refrigeration and distant echoes replaced by an almost palpable silence. Walking down an aisle lined with clearance items, Linda and Marcus suddenly heard a soft weeping coming from one of the storage sections off the main floor. Cautiously, they followed the sorrowful sound to a back corner near the employee break room. There, in the gloom, stood the spectral figure of Richard Miller once more. This time, he was unmistakable, a gaunt, trembling presence with eyes that brimmed with anguish and regret. "Richard," Linda whispered, her voice full of compassion as she stepped forward. "Is that really you?" The ghost's mouth moved, forming silent words that were carried on a wind of despair. Marcus strained to hear. He says, "I never felt seen. I never mattered." The air grew colder, and the overhead lights flickered violently as if reacting to his words. Greg, who had been patrolling nearby, burst into the aisle, his face pale. "What's going on here?" he demanded, though his usual stern tone was replaced by one of genuine alarm. The figure turned its hollow gaze upon him, and in a raspy, echoing voice, it declared, "You forgot me. You all forgot me." In that moment, the lights dimmed further, and a surge of cold wind whipped through the aisle, sending merchandise tumbling from the shelves. Carla, who had come running with her radio, grabbed Linda's arm and pleaded, "Please, we have to do something. He's trapped here, and he's hurting." Linda's eyes shone with resolve. "We must honor him. His spirit remains because his story was silenced." The group huddled together, listening as the apparition's presence waxed and waned in the flickering light. Greg, now visibly shaken, murmured, "I was wrong. This isn't just superstition. There's something real here. We need to acknowledge his pain." In the tense silence that followed, Linda proposed a plan. One born not of fear, but of respect. They would create a memorial in the store, a small corner dedicated to Richard Miller and to those who had been forgotten by the relentless march of corporate efficiency. The group would research his history, ensure that his story was told, and most importantly, that the employees would hold a vigil to honor his memory. Only then, Linda hoped, might the lingering presence be finally able to find rest. That night, as the employees gathered in the back office to arrange a small memorial, a makeshift altar with photos, a handwritten note, and a rose left by an anonymous coworker, the store took on a somber, almost sacred atmosphere. The flickering lights seemed to steady, and the oppressive chill lifted just slightly, as if appeased by the collective act of remembrance. In the silence, Marcus, Linda, Carla, and even Greg listened to the ghostly echoes recede, replaced by a profound, mournful calm. For the next few nights, things gradually returned to normal. The supernatural events subsided, and employees began to speak of Richard Miller with a quiet reverence rather than fear. Yet, deep in the recesses of the Walmart, a sense of bittersweet gratitude lingered, a reminder that behind the bright signs and polished floors, real lives and stories were interwoven with sorrow and neglect. In quiet moments, when the store was nearly empty and the hum of machinery was the only sound, some swore they could see a small figure in an old uniform watching from the shadows, a silent sentinel ensuring that his memory would never be forgotten. Marcus continued his nightly patrols, no longer with a heart full of dread, but with a respectful understanding of the delicate balance between the living and the unseen. Linda took it upon herself to share Richard Miller's story with new hires as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the human cost hidden behind the corporate machine. Carla, whose trembling had faded over time, became a gentle guardian of the store's legacy, always placing a rose on the memorial altar when she clocked in. And even Greg, once a skeptic, found himself pausing in his busy day to acknowledge the silent voices that whispered through the aisles. The Walmart had changed after that fateful night, a place where the echoes of the past danced just beneath the surface of modern commerce, where every mundane shift held the possibility of revelations too chilling to ignore. For those who walked its corridors in the quiet hours of the night, there was now a palpable understanding that every brick, every shelf, and every faded sign held a fragment of a story of loss, remembrance, and the eternal quest for acknowledgement. In that sprawling emporium of everyday consumerism, a single ghost's cry for recognition had transformed the atmosphere from one of clinical efficiency to a space imbued with human emotion, a place where the living, in their quiet moments of reflection, could reach out and honor a forgotten soul, ensuring that even in the heart of retail, no one would ever truly be lost or forgotten again.
Story number 7,
The rain had been falling steadily for hours when Claire stepped out of the taxi and stared up at the looming facade of the Bellemere Hotel. Its red brick exterior, once elegant and welcoming, now appeared worn and neglected under the weight of ivy and the ceaseless drumming of the storm. A flickering neon sign in the lobby window offered little comfort, its glow pale and intermittent. Claire clutched her overnight bag, hesitating at the threshold that would lead her into a night of restless uncertainty. She had come to the Bellemere Hotel not by choice, but by circumstance, an unexpected cancellation, a sudden detour, and the desperate need for shelter on a stormy night. The rumors of the hotel's troubled past had circulated in hushed whispers among locals. Stories of a lingering presence, inexplicable sounds echoing in empty halls, and guests who checked in but were never quite the same when they left. As Claire fumbled with her key card at the reception, she could feel that something was off, like a hidden observer watching her every move. Inside the lobby, the air was heavy with the musty odor of disuse. The reception desk, a dark mahogany relic, stood abandoned in a space that was dimly lit by a few flickering fixtures. A tired-looking clerk in a stained uniform sat behind the counter. His name tag read, Sam. He offered her a hollow smile as she approached. "Welcome to the Bellemere," Sam said in a tone that barely masked his wariness. "Check-in is at the usual time, 2 a.m. Until then, you'll have to wait in the lounge." He slid an old-fashioned key across the counter, its metal cold and heavy in her hand. "Room 218. And miss, please be careful. Some incidents have been known to happen in that part of the hotel." His eyes flicked to the darkened corridor leading to the guest rooms, and his voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "Better not stray too far from your door." Claire's stomach twisted in apprehension. "Incidents?" she repeated. Sam's smile was half regret, half warning. "Nothing to worry about, if you keep to yourself." With that, he returned to a stack of unfiled papers as the sound of the storm muffled any further explanation. After spending a lonely hour in the lounge amid worn armchairs and outdated magazines, Claire felt the pull of exhaustion. The clock on the wall ticked toward 2 a.m., and she gathered her courage to head to her assigned room. The hallway was a narrow corridor, lined with faded wallpaper and dim sconces that barely lit the way. The sound of her footsteps was strangely amplified in the silence, and every creak of the aging floorboards made her heart race faster. Room 218 was at the end of the hall, its door almost hidden by a heavy, tattered curtain that hedged a small sitting area. Claire inserted the key and pushed the door open slowly. Inside, the room was modest. A queen-size bed with a worn duvet, a small desk piled with old letters and photographs, and a window that overlooked the overgrown courtyard. The only sign of life was a single lamp on the nightstand that flickered weakly. As she set down her bag, the room seemed to exhale a sigh of resignation, as though it had been waiting for someone like her all along. That night, as the storm raged outside, Claire tried to catch snippets of sleep. The incessant patter of rain against the window was intermingled with distant, indistinguishable noises that she couldn't quite place. Halfway through the night, as she lay awake in the silence, she thought she heard a soft murmur from down the hall, a gentle, almost pleading whisper that seemed to beckon her attention. Her pulse quickened as she strained to listen, but the sound faded away into the storm's unrelenting din. Morning brought a hazy light filtered through grimy windows. Claire awoke with a sense of disquiet that clung to her like a second skin. Determined to shake off the lingering unease of the night, she decided to explore the hotel and maybe find answers to the strange sensations that had plagued her sleep. Clad in a light sweater and cautious optimism, she stepped out of her room and ventured into the lobby. The Bellemere Hotel's corridors were nearly deserted at this hour, the silence so thick it almost drowned out the soft murmur of conversation from a small group gathered near the reception desk. Among them was an older gentleman in a tweed jacket who seemed to have a story on his lips and eyes that held years of sorrow. He introduced himself as Mr. Carter, a regular guest who had been coming to the hotel for as long as he could remember. "I suppose you're new around here?" Mr. Carter said with a hint of a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. This old place has a way of finding you, though I can't say why. Some say it's haunted by lost souls, or that its walls remember every tear shed within them." His voice lowered as he leaned in. Last night, I heard footsteps in the corridor near room 218. I thought I'd come to see if you experienced the same thing. Claire's heart skipped a beat. Footsteps? She repeated, the memory of her own unsettled night stirring within her. I thought I heard something too, like a whisper calling my name. Mr. Carter nodded slowly. The hotel has its quirks, but be wary. The stories are not just idle tales, they are warnings. There's a history here, a tragedy that never quite ends. He paused, his gaze drifting toward the darkened stairs that led to the basement. They say a fire decades ago claimed the lives of several guests and staff. The hotel was rebuilt, but some souls they linger, still searching for what was lost. The conversation left Claire feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the lingering cold in the morning air. She returned to her room, haunted by the notion that the walls of Bellemere might be imbued with grief and unresolved torment. That evening, after a day filled with unsettling small talk and hushed stories from hotel staff, Claire resolved to document her experiences. She began writing in a small notebook, noting every creak, every inexplicable whisper, and every fleeting shadow that seemed to dart away when she turned her eyes to it. As dusk fell, the hotel once again transformed into a place of foreboding silence. The corridors darkened, and the sound of the storm subsided to a low, persistent drumming that reverberated through the old bricks. Shortly after midnight, Claire sat in her room, writing by the light of her flickering lamp. The silence was punctuated by distant echoes that she could scarcely distinguish from the rustle of paper. Suddenly, a knock came at her door. It was soft, almost hesitant, as if born of uncertainty. Claire's heart raced as she approached and opened the door a crack. There, standing in the dim hallway, was a petite woman in a faded nightgown, her eyes wide and filled with tears. "Are you alone?" the woman asked, her voice quavering. I need your help." Her tone was desperate, pleading. Claire hesitated. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice trembling with equal parts fear and compassion. The woman's gaze dropped, her hand trembling as she clutched a frayed shawl around her shoulders. "I used to work here. My name is Evelyn. I've been trying to find a way out for so long," she said, barely above a whisper. Her eyes met Claire's, and in them, Claire saw agony and a longing for release. Before Claire could respond, the corridor lights flickered, and a cold gust of wind rushed past them. Evelyn shuddered violently, as though a great weight had suddenly pressed upon her. "They follow me," she said. "They will not let me go until my story is heard." Her voice grew insistent. "You must listen. You must help me tell them what happened." Overwhelmed by a mix of empathy and apprehension, Claire invited Evelyn into her room. Once seated by the lamp, Evelyn's story unfurled like a dark tapestry. "I was the head housekeeper here many years ago," she began, her voice laced with sorrow. "There was a terrible fire, one that the managers tried to cover up. Innocent lives were lost, but no one was held accountable. I tried to save as many as I could, but I failed. Ever since that night, I felt a presence, a constant, gnawing despair that haunts every corner of this place." Claire listened, transfixed, as Evelyn recounted how she had spent years trapped in the hotel after that fateful night, her soul tethered to the building by guilt and sorrow. "I am not the only one," Evelyn continued. "I sense others, voices crying out in the darkness, footsteps that should not be there. The fire took more than lives, it stole our chance for peace. And now they are trapped, reliving their final moments, condemned to wander these halls." Outside, the hour grew late, and the storm's remnants created an eerie quiet. In the distance, a low, sorrowful moan resonated through the halls, as if the building itself lamented its cursed history. Claire felt the weight of the past pressing in. "Evelyn," she asked softly, "is there anything that can set you free?" Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes as she replied, "Only by giving voice to our story. Only when the truth is acknowledged can the dead find rest." Her hand trembled as she pointed toward the ornate staircase leading to the lobby. "There is a guest book, older than any I've seen here. It contains the names of those who perished in that fire. Perhaps if you read it, maybe the hotel will finally release us." Determined to honor Evelyn's plea, Claire rose and, with the ghostly woman at her side, ventured back into the gloomy corridors. The air was cooler than before, laden with an inexplicable melancholy that seemed to seep from the very walls. In the reception area, behind a dusty counter, Claire discovered an ancient leather-bound guest book. Its pages were yellowed and brittle, the ink faded but still legible. As she flipped through its pages, she read the names and dates. hundreds of names, interwoven with brief, heart-wrenching notes of loss and despair. Almost imperceptibly, the sound of faint whispers swelled around her. The murmurs grew louder until they filled her mind with the collective grief of those long gone. "Listen," Evelyn's voice whispered directly into her ear. "Hear our stories. Remember us." For a moment, Claire felt as if she were caught in a vortex of pain and memory, the names and voices echoing ceaselessly. In that overwhelming surge, she realized that the hotel itself was a mausoleum of forgotten souls, a repository of tragedies that had never found closure. The experience in the guest book changed something deep inside her. With a newfound resolve, Claire returned to her room, determined to share what she had learned with the few kind-hearted souls still working there, and perhaps to the world beyond. She spent the remainder of her stay meticulously transcribing the names and stories, even as the hotel's spectral inhabitants whispered their approval and gratitude in the quiet hours of the night. In the days that followed, strange occurrences at the Bellemere began to subside. The restless moaning in the halls diminished, and the flickering lights steadied as if reassured by the act of remembrance. Sam, the weary clerk from reception, looked noticeably less tense when he passed by room 218. Even the management, who had once dismissed the staff's accounts as mere superstition, began to acknowledge that something profound and tragic had happened under their watch. Claire compiled her notes into a detailed account, which she sent to a local newspaper known for investigating historical mysteries. In her report, she recounted the sorrowful tale of the Bellemere fire, the cover-up that had silenced many lives, and the plight of Evelyn and the countless others left to wander the halls. The story, laden with raw emotion and chilling encounters, struck a chord with the community. Soon, a memorial service was organized at the hotel, attended not only by former employees and local residents, but also by relatives of the victims who had long demanded answers. On the night of the memorial, as the hotel filled with whispered prayers and quiet resolve, Claire stood in the lobby near the old guest book. Candles flickered along the walls, and soft music, almost imperceptible, echoed in the background. Evelyn appeared briefly by Claire's side, a gentle, sorrowful smile on her translucent face, before vanishing into the still air. In that moment, it was as if the collective burden of years of unspoken sorrow had finally been lifted. The voices of the dead joined in a final, harmonious murmur of thanks, fading into a silence that was not empty, but peaceful. The Bellemere Hotel continued to operate in the following years, but the atmosphere was forever transformed. The memorial had brought a measure of closure to its haunted past, and many of the spectral disturbances ceased. Yet, on stormy nights, some still claimed that if you listened closely, you could hear quiet whispers in the corridors, the soft murmur of voices giving thanks for finally being remembered. For Claire, the experience left an indelible mark. She had come seeking shelter from a storm, only to be immersed in a world of ghostly sorrow and long-buried truths. Her article and subsequent public talks helped ensure that the victims of that tragic night were no longer forgotten, their names etched not only in an old guest book, but also in the hearts of those who cared enough to listen. And sometimes, when the wind whispered through the Bellemere Hotel's ancient halls, the echo of grateful voices would remind all who heard them that even in darkness, remembrance could bring light.
Story number 8.
In the heart of a forgotten countryside, where winding dirt roads crisscrossed between fields of golden wheat and ancient oak groves, lay the small town of Haverbrook. The locals, proud and tight-knit, called it home for generations. Outwardly, Haverbrook exuded a comforting, pastoral charm, a cluster of time-worn storefronts, a creaking water tower, and neat lawns lining a single main street. But beneath its placid veneer, an unsettling history lurked in whispers and dusty files, haunting every corner of the community. It was late autumn when Mara Donovan, a freelance journalist with a penchant for the macabre, arrived in Haverbrook. Her latest assignment was to uncover the truth behind the town's eerie legends. Stories of lost wanderers who vanished along the desolate country roads, mysterious figures seen roaming the abandoned mill, and strange lights flickering over the old cemetery on moonless nights. Mara was determined to separate myth from reality, hoping to reveal a story that was both heartfelt and horrifying. Her first stop was the dilapidated Haverbrook General Store, where time seemed to have slowed to a crawl. The store's owner, old Mr. Finch, sat behind a creaky counter stacking newspapers. His lined face bore the weight of decades, and his eyes, sharp despite his frailty, betrayed a deep well of memories. "You're here about our town stories, ain't ya?" he asked in a gravelly tone as Mara introduced herself. "Yes, Mr. Finch," she replied, voice steady but laced with curiosity. "I'd like to know what you can tell me about the incidents on Old Miller Road and the legends of the spectral miller. People say there are ghosts roaming at night." Mr. Finch leaned in, his eyes darkening. "That road's a cursed path," he murmured. "I remember when the mill burned down back in '62. Folks say the fire didn't just take timber and machinery, it took souls. I'd seen lights dancing on the horizon since. And as for the miller, I've heard old wives' tales of a man who can't rest, forever searching for the lost ledger that holds his sins. Some even claim to have seen him prowling outside the mill ruins during the witching hour." Chilled yet intrigued, Mara scribbled notes. "Did anyone ever try to investigate these claims seriously?" she asked. Mr. Finch's voice dropped. "There was a group of teenagers a few years back, all high on the thrill of it. They set out to prove the legends were bunk. One by one, they vanished. Their families never got answers, and the town's been whispering about it ever since." His eyes flashed in a mixture of sorrow and warning. "I'd advise you to be careful with what you dig up. Some stories are better left buried." With that, Mara left the store and ventured toward Old Miller Road. As dusk approached, the sky bled a muted red, and the crisp air carried an undercurrent of foreboding. Mara's car headlights cut through the gloaming as she navigated the winding road, lined with gnarled trees whose silhouettes seemed to twist into grim faces. Every so often, a rusted sign would creak on its hinges in the gentle breeze, proclaiming ominous names like Devil's Crossing or Lost Souls Lane. Though she tried to focus on her notes, the charged atmosphere began to infiltrate her thoughts. As Mara drove further into the countryside, memories of Mr. Finch's words echoed in her mind. She recalled a conversation with Sheriff Alan Brewer, a reserved and earnest man whose steady gaze belied his discomfort with revisiting old tragedies. Mara had arranged to meet him at the outskirts of town near the abandoned mill. When they met under a skeletal oak whose branches were raked bare by the wind, the sheriff's expression was grim. "Miss Donovan, I'm not one for tall tales, but Haverbrook isn't all sunshine and roses," Sheriff Brewer said as he lit a cigarette. "That mill, for instance, most of you think it's just old folklore, but on nights when the moon hides, you can hear the cries of those lost in the fire. Canwids, and worse, you might catch a glimpse of old Miller himself, stumbling through the ruins as if still carrying a burden from another life." He paused, staring into the distance as if trying to recall the visions from his restless dreams. "There was one night, about a year ago. I got a call. A young man had taken a shortcut along Old Miller Road and hadn't been seen since. I found his car abandoned, engine still warm. The witness said he heard footsteps pacing behind him and a low, sorrowful moan. I swear, at the edge of the woods, I saw a faint light moving, like a lantern swinging in a dead hand." Mara's heart pounded as Brewer's words painted a scene too vivid to dismiss. "Do you truly believe it was the ghost of the miller?" she pressed quietly. Brewer exhaled smoke and met her gaze. "I'm a man of law and order, not ghost stories, but there are things in this town that defy explanation. Sometimes, when you've seen enough to know the darkness behind people's eyes, you can't help but think that some wrongs linger long after death." The night grew darker as Mara retraced these accounts in her notebook. On her own, she found herself drawn to the dilapidated remains of the old mill, half swallowed by time and underbrush. The building stood like a hulking specter, its broken windows and charred walls silently narrating the tragedy of that fiery night. With a camera in hand and a determined glint in her eyes, she stepped toward the entrance. The air was thick with a mixture of smoke and decay, and every footstep seemed unnaturally loud in the eerie stillness. Inside, Mara's flashlight revealed remnants of the past. A scorched ledger spilled open on a broken desk, charred tools scattered across the floor, and a mysterious, persistent drip of water that echoed like a metronome. In the silence, she could almost feel the weight of guilt and sorrow that clung to the ruins. And then, as if summoned by those very emotions, a soft sound echoed through the darkness, a gentle, rhythmic tapping like the distant clatter of fingernails on wood. "Hello," Mara called out, her voice trembling. "Is someone there?" Her call was swallowed by the oppressive silence, leaving only the sound of the dripping water. She advanced cautiously, heart pounding, until she reached the center of the ruined building. There, in the flickering beam of her flashlight, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. On one of the remaining walls, smeared in what looked like dark, oily residue, was a handprint, large, imperfect, and distinctly human. It was as if someone had pressed their hand against the surface, leaving behind a mark of desperate warning. At that moment, a sudden gust of wind slammed the door shut behind her. Mara spun around, her flashlight dancing frantically across the charred walls. She tried the door, but it wouldn't budge. Her breath came in shallow gasps as she realized with dawning horror that she was not alone. A low, almost inaudible whisper seeped into her ears, carrying with it the unmistakable sound of sorrow and accusation. "Why did you come?" the voice hissed, wavering like a dying ember. Before she could muster a reply, a figure materialized from the shadows, a man clad in tattered clothing, his face gaunt and eyes brimming with terror and regret. His presence was both ethereal and disturbingly real. I was the miller," he stammered, his voice cracking as if burdened by centuries of torment. "I carry the ledger of my sins and the souls of those I could not save. I am doomed to wander these ruins." Mara's rational mind battled with her instinctive dread. "What do you want from me?" she demanded, though her voice shook. The ghost's hollow eyes bore into hers. "To remember," he replied softly, his tone a mix of longing and despair. "To ensure that the pain is not forgotten, the fire took lives, and the truth was buried with us. You must tell our story so that we may rest." As his words faded into a sorrowful sigh, the apparition began to waver, like smoke on a cold wind, until he disappeared entirely. The door then creaked open on its own, releasing Mara back into the night. Outside, the storm had subsided into a quiet drizzle. Shaken to her core, she rushed back to her car, determined to compile every detail of this harrowing encounter. Over the next several days, Mara immersed herself in the town's dark history. She pored over archived newspapers in the public library, discovered faded photographs in the local museum, and interviewed the descendants of survivors. Each source added more layers to the tragedy. The mills collapsed during a particularly brutal fire, the subsequent cover-up by local authorities, and the unspoken grief that had followed in the wake of the disaster. Many residents, though reluctant to speak openly, alluded to eerie happenings. Unexplained lights near the ruins, ghostly figures seen meandering down Old Miller Road, and even a sense of foreboding that seemed to permeate the air on certain nights. One crisp evening, while interviewing a kindly old woman named Mrs. Watkins on the porch of her creaky farmhouse, Mara heard a distant wail echo across the quiet landscape. Mrs. Watkins, her lined face momentarily paling, whispered, "That's them, my dear, the souls who never left." Her eyes filled with unshed tears as she recounted how, every year on the anniversary of the fire, the town would experience a night of inexplicable sorrow, a time when the veil between the living and the dead grew thin, and the spirits roamed free, reenacting their final, agonizing moments. Determined to witness this phenomenon for herself, Mara arranged to return to the ruins on the anniversary night. As dusk approached, the sky shifted to bruised purples and grays. The wind picked up, rustling dead leaves across the abandoned road, and an uneasy hush fell over Haverbrook. Mara, armed with her camera, voice recorder, and an indomitable will, drove to Old Miller Road once more. This time, she did not venture alone. Sheriff Brewer, who had grown increasingly convinced that the town's legends were based on real tragedy, accompanied her. Together, they reached the edge of the ruins as twilight surrendered to the deep ink of night. The mill stood silent and foreboding against the starless sky, its charred bones illuminated only by Mara's steady beam of light and Brewer's unwavering flashlight. They settled on a mound of rubble just outside the structure, waiting in tense silence. Minutes stretched into an hour, each tick of the clock echoing in the still air. Then, as the witching hour approached, a sound, soft and mournful, began to rise. It was like the collective sighing of countless souls, a distant chorus of despair that sent chills down their spines. Suddenly, a spectral glow emanated from within the ruins. Brewer's eyes widened in disbelief as ghostly forms began to coalesce among the shattered walls. A vision of men and women in archaic clothing, their expressions etched with anguish. Amid them, the figure of the miller appeared again, his presence commanding yet tragic. His gaze swept the assembly of spirits before resting on Mara and Brewer. With a trembling voice, the miller spoke. "You have come to listen. You will carry our memories into the world of the living so that our pain may be acknowledged." His voice resonated like a hymn of lament, each word weighted with sorrow. "Do not let us fade into oblivion. Tell our story so that the truth of our loss may heal what has long been broken." Sheriff Brewer cleared his throat, struggling to steady his voice. "We mean no harm. We only wish to understand and learn from this tragedy." His statement hung in the air as if embraced by the spectral assembly, the atmosphere growing heavy with an unspoken bond of shared grief. Mara's heart pounded as she recorded every word, every tremor of despair that laced the ghost's tone. "I promise," she said softly, "I will not let your voices be silenced again." In that moment, the phantom of the miller extended a hand as though offering solace, then slowly receded into the darkness along with the other apparitions. The moon, obscured by wisps of cloud, cast a faint silver glow over the ruins, and the ethereal procession faded into the night. In the following weeks, Mara's detailed article on Heaverbrook's tragic past and the spectral sightings spread beyond the local paper. Readers were captivated by her honest, raw account, a narrative woven from first-hand experience, unassailable documents, and the heartfelt testimonies of residents long haunted by loss. While some dismissed it as overactive imaginations spurred by grief, many found solace in the acknowledgement of the town's sorrow, a communal catharsis that had been long overdue. Families who had lost loved ones in the mill fire found a measure of comfort in knowing that their pain had been seen, and that the legacy of those who perished would forever be remembered. Sheriff Brewer, once stoic and reserved, began to speak more openly at town meetings about reconciling with the past. "We have ignored our history for too long," he said at one meeting in the modest town hall. "Our mistakes, our losses, they are part of Haverbrook. Acknowledging them is the first step to healing for both the living and the dead." His words resonated deeply with a community that had silently suffered for generations. Mara received letters from readers and former residents, many of whom confessed that on certain nights they too heard the soft lamentations of the lost or witnessed fleeting shadows near the ruins. One elderly man wrote, "The past is never truly gone in Haverbrook. I feel it in the chill of the wind and the creak of old floors. Now, thanks to you, our memories live on." Each message reinforced the truth that there was much more to Haverbrook than its idyllic small-town facade, a truth that was painful yet necessary. For Mara, the experience transformed her work. She continued to explore the hidden histories of small towns, her writing ever infused with the delicate balance between horror and humanity. In her quiet moments, she recalled the miller's plea and the sorrowful chorus of voices that night. She understood that in every whisper of loss and every shudder of regret lay the potential for redemption, a truth only revealed when we stopped to listen. As the years passed, Haverbrook slowly embraced its past. A modest memorial was erected near the remains of the mill, etched with the names of those who perished in the fire. The town's collective memory, once shrouded in whispers and shadows, was brought into the light by the brave souls who dared confront its darker chapters. And on stormy nights when the wind howled like a chorus of forgotten voices, the people of Haverbrook would pause and remember. A quiet, communal act of catharsis that ensured the lost would never be forgotten. In that small town, where every creaking floorboard and every rustling leaf seemed to carry a fragment of sorrow, the boundary between myth and reality dissolved. The ghosts of the past, once condemned to roam in silent anguish, found a measure of peace in being remembered, and the living discovered that acknowledgement was the first step toward healing old wounds. Haverbrook's story, the tale of tragedy, loss, and ultimately redemption, endured, whispered on the wind, and etched into the hearts of all who called it home.
Story number 9.
Jack Crusher Malone had been a trucker for over 20 years, hauling freight across dusty highways through endless nights and in weather that would make lesser men cower in fear. But nothing in all his long-haul career could have prepared him for the journey he'd be forced to take one restless autumn night. It was near midnight on a bitterly cold evening when Jack received a call through the CB radio that would send chills down his spine. The familiar crackle of static gave way to a voice that sounded older than time itself. "Breaker, breaker, if you're out on Highway 47, Keep your eyes peeled. They're coming, the voice rasped, barely audible over the hum of the engine. Jack adjusted his volume and listened intently, his grip tightening on the wheel. He'd heard strange chatter on the road before, a few ghostly jokes in faded frequencies or old-timers telling tall tales, but this sounded different. It was grim, as if warning of a horror that was all too real. Jack had spent years listening to the strange confessions of fellow truckers at truck stops and roadside diners, trading stories that blurred the line between myth and reality. He knew the legends of phantom riggers and ghostly convoys that roamed barren highways. But tonight, the message on his radio was serious. As he merged onto the deserted stretch of Highway 47, a feeling of foreboding clung to him, like the mist that swirled along the pavement. The road was slick with rain from a recent downpour, and a dense fog began to roll in as he drove deeper into the heart of nowhere. His rig, a roaring beast of diesel and steel affectionately dubbed the Iron Stallion, growled beneath him as he pushed the engine harder. Though he'd faced some of the worst weather nature could muster, the combination of cold, fog, and isolation unsettled him more than usual. Halfway through the journey, while Jack was approaching an old rest area near a decommissioned truck stop that had long been abandoned, his CB radio burst to life again. This time, a gruff male voice cut through the static with urgency. "This is Big Red. I'm calling out to all rigs. If you're on 47, I'm in trouble near the old Weeping Willow exit. Help me out." They're here. Big Red was a legend in his own right, a burly trucker whose stories were part of the folklore of the road. Jack remembered meeting him years back at a truckers' convention, and though they hadn't spoken much after that, his voice carried weight in these circumstances. Jack's eyes narrowed beneath his furrowed brow. "Big Red, this is Crusher. What do you mean, they're here?" he asked, speaking into the radio with a mix of professional calm and hidden dread. The radio crackled, and Big Red's voice returned, strained and edged with terror. "I don't have time, man. Just watch for the rig. It's parked on the shoulder near the willow trees. It's not mine. Not in any earthly way. Please, Crusher, help me." Then, as suddenly as it started, the transmission faded into static, leaving Jack with more questions than answers. Reluctantly, Jack turned off the interstate and followed the narrow, unpaved road leading to Weeping Willow exit. His headlights cut through the heavy fog, revealing gnarled willow trees hanging low over the road like skeletal hands. His pulse quickened as a chill wind swept across the windshield, carrying with it an eerie whisper that wasn't quite the murmur of nature. As he neared a bend along the road, Jack saw it. The silhouette of a truck parked on the side of the road beneath a weeping willow whose branches drooped as if in mourning. The rig looked out of place. Its design was older than any modern model, with rounded curves and a rusted chassis that seemed reminiscent of trucks from another era. Its headlights, dark and lifeless, stared into the void. Jack gripped the steering wheel tighter and slowed to a stop. "Big Red?" he called over the CB radio, his voice steady despite the knot of fear tightening in his chest. The radio remained silent for a few agonizing seconds before a faint reply emerged. "Crusher. It's not him. It's something else." Without warning, the engine of the Iron Stallion sputtered and its dashboard lights flickered. Jack muttered curses under his breath and reached for the ignition. Just then, a movement in the fog caught his eye. The old rig's door slowly creaked open, and from its shadowy interior stepped a figure in a faded trucker's cap and worn flannel shirt. The silhouette paused, as if hesitating between two worlds. Jack's heart hammered in his chest as the figure's head snapped up, revealing hollow eyes that seemed to pierce straight through him. "Move aside," the figure rasped, his voice layered with a tone that was both authoritative and sorrowful, "or prepare to be trapped with us." Jack slammed his foot on the brake, his mind racing. What are you?" he shouted, adrenaline surging. The figure's expression twisted into one of pained regret, and with an emotion that was almost sympathetic, it replied, "I was just like you once, a traveler on these endless roads, but now I am bound to this forsaken highway, cursed to seek redemption for sins long past." Before Jack could absorb the chilling confession, the figure jerked backward, and from around the curve in the fog, more shapes appeared. Trucks of various sizes, their forms blurred and indistinct, yet unmistakably real, lined the road like a ghostly procession. Their headlights glowed with an eerie, pulsating light, and their engines hummed with an unearthly resonance. The phantom convoy began to move slowly, a spectral march that defied the natural order of time and space. In the silence, Jack's hands trembled on the wheel. His CB radio hissed with frantic chatter as voices from unseen drivers urged him to join the convoy, whispers promising safety and, more insidiously, eternal rest. "Crusher, roll with us. Escape your mortal pains," one disembodied voice urged. Another croaked, "We are kin, forever bound by the road of regret. Come, let us show you the way." The offers were chilling, seductive even, but as he listened, Jack felt his very soul resist. He had seen enough tragedies and lost comrades to know that some bargains come with a terrible, irreversible price. Summoning all his courage, Jack responded to the radio with firm, gruff determination. "Listen up, you damned specters. I ain't joining no ghost parade. I drive for the living." His tone, sharp and defiant, echoed into the spectral static. For a fleeting moment, the phantom convoy halted, an eerie pause that felt like the calm before an inevitable storm. Then, with a roar that defied the silence of the night, the phantom trucks surged forward in a synchronized wave, their headlights blazing as if fueled by vengeful intent. The ethereal vehicles advanced relentlessly, moving with a precision that belied their supernatural nature. In that heart-stopping moment, Jack's instincts screamed at him to flee. He pressed the accelerator, determined to outrun the cursed procession. The Iron Stallion roared back to life, its engine howling as Jack tore down the dark, winding road. The phantom trucks pursued him like relentless shadows, closing in with every mile. Jack's knuckles were white on the wheel as he pushed the Iron Stallion to its limits. He switched lanes recklessly, attempting to shake off the spectral convoy, but with each twist of the road, the ghosts seemed to multiply, manifesting in every reflective puddle and every pitch-black intersection. At one dangerous juncture, Jack's rig skidded on the slick pavement. His heart lurched as he fought to regain control amid the swirling fog and headlights that danced like demons across his windshield. In his peripheral vision, the ghostly figures of truckers, faces etched with sorrow, eyes vacant yet pleading, appeared at his side, their voices merging into a mournful chorus. "You cannot escape the road, Crusher. You carry our burdens." Tears of frustration blurred his vision. He remembered the countless nights spent hauling freight across desolate highways, the isolation and the inexplicable weight of loneliness that only a life on the road could bestow. Yet nothing compared to this. A confrontation not with human exhaustion, but with a manifestation of all the lost souls and regrets that haunted him. Memories of deceased friends and ill-fated journeys crashed over him like waves. Was this his destiny, a fate sealed by the sins and tragedies of the road? In a desperate bid for survival, Jack swerved sharply onto a narrow service road that bordered a dense forest. The unnatural procession behind him faltered for an instant, caught in the labyrinth of twisted trees. But as he sped through the darkened woods, the terror of the phantom convoy never left him. Every gust of wind seemed to echo with ghostly voices, every rustle in the undergrowth a reminder of the damned souls in pursuit. When Jack finally emerged from the forest onto a forgotten stretch of highway, the spectral trucks had vanished into the night, as if swallowed by the mist. His rig's engine idled softly in the oppressive silence, and for a long, breathless moment, Jack dared to hope he might be safe. Yet the quiet was deceptive. The CB radio remained eerily silent, the static punctuated by an occasional low whisper that made his skin crawl. Determined to report the unholy encounter, Jack pulled off at the next truck stop, a rundown, deserted diner that served as a haven for truckers seeking a short respite. Inside, the place was dimly lit, its walls adorned with faded photographs of smiling drivers from an era long past. Jack took a seat in a booth, nursing a cup of bitter coffee and dialing into the CB channel once more. "Crusher to all units, come in," he said in a low, gravelly voice, trying to sound professional, despite the tremor in his tone. "I've just encountered something not of this world." His words were met with a beat of dead silence before a hushed voice replied. "We heard you, Crusher. You're not the first to see him, and you won't be the last." Another voice followed, softer yet laced with despair. "The road takes more than fuel. It takes souls." Jack's throat tightened as the realization set in that the specters of the highway were not mere urban legends. They were the accumulated regrets, the tragedies of lost lives, and the dark bargains struck in the lonely solitude of the road. Every trucker on the highway, in his own way, bore a fragment of that eternal weight. Exhausted, Jack couldn't shake the memories of the spectral miller and the ghost convoy, images that would haunt his dreams for years to come. That night, he slept in a worn-out motel room barely lit by a flickering neon vacancy sign. In the dark hours before dawn, he awoke to a persistent knocking at his door. When he opened it a crack, there, just beyond the threshold, stood a figure in a faded trucker cap, its face obscured by shadow. "Are you Crusher?" the figure asked in a voice that dripped with melancholy. "I'm here to remind you. You are one of us now. The road never lets you go. It has claimed your soul as payment." Jack slammed the door shut, heart pounding as the knock faded away into the oppressive silence. In the days that followed, Jack found himself changing routes, avoiding Highway 47 at all costs. But no matter how far he drove, the memory of that spectral encounter followed him. Fellow truckers shared hushed tales around flickering diner lights, stories of ghostly rigs that appeared at dusk, of phantom convoys emerging from swirling mists, and of drivers who vanished, leaving behind only the echo of a CB call that warned others to steer clear of cursed roads. One cold morning, as Jack was fueling up at a remote truck stop on the outskirts of a sprawling desert, an older driver named Hank sidled up to him. Hank's weathered face and tired eyes held secrets of decades on the road. "I heard about what happened to you, Crusher," he said quietly. "I've seen them too. The ones that ride when the night is dark and the fog is thick. They're more than just bad dreams. They're the souls of those who lost everything on the road, and sometimes they come looking for a ride." Hank's tone was not mocking, but resigned, as if accepting a fate that no one could outrun. Jack forced a laugh, though it sounded hollow. "I don't need a lift from the dead, Hank," he muttered. But deep down, he knew the grim truth in Hank's words. That day, as he drove through the endless desert highway under a blazing sun, the scars of that eerie night never quite faded. Every shadow, every shimmer on the horizon seemed to hint at the ghostly figures waiting in the darkness, reminders that the road's debts were never fully repaid. In the long, lonesome nights that followed, Jack began to document his experiences in a battered journal kept on the dashboard of the Iron Stallion. He wrote of the spectral rig under the weeping willows, of the phantom convoy that roared with vengeance, and of the voices on the CB that whispered promises of eternal highway freedom. His entries grew more frantic and desperate with each passing mile, as if he were trying to capture a truth that would never let him forget. Other truckers' stories joined his in an unholy chorus, a compilation of real encounters that began to paint a picture of a road haunted by unquiet souls, where every turn could be the last. One fateful night, as a winter storm hammered the highways with icy rain and blinding snow, Jack found himself pulled into a hidden stretch of road in the mountains, one that did not appear on any map he'd ever seen. The temperature dropped sharply, and his rig's cab filled with a dense, swirling fog that blocked out everything but the dashboard's pale glow. Unbeknownst to him, this stretch of road was infamous among truckers, a place where many had reported seeing impossible convoys and hearing voices from the abyss. Driving carefully, Jack noticed that the CB radio crackled with static again, but amid the static, he heard a voice he recognized, a voice he had thought he'd never hear again. "Crusher, I'm still here," it said softly. It was Big Red, the trucker whose desperate plea had brought Jack to Weeping Willow Exit that fateful night. Except this time, Big Red's tone was not of alarm, but of resignation. "I tried to run, Crusher, but the road claimed me." The radio fell silent for a long moment before a chorus of disembodied voices answered in unison. Join us, forever on the road." A terror unlike anything Jack had felt before gripped him. His heart pounded as he slammed on the brakes, nearly skidding off the slick roadway. In the midst of the storm, surrounded by a void of howling wind and ghostly static, Jack realized he could no longer escape the truth. The road was a living, breathing entity that demanded payment. A toll paid not in dollars or miles, but in the very soul of the driver. And he had already begun to pay his debt. As the first rays of a bleak sunrise pierced through the storm clouds, Jack made a decision. He would record his story, compile every encounter, and share the grim legacy of the haunted highways before the road claimed him completely. He pulled off safely at a roadside service station that offered little comfort under the cold gaze of dawn. Sitting inside a ramshackle diner, he typed out his journal entries on an old laptop, the clack of keys punctuating the silence like a funeral dirge. Outside, the highway stretched onward, a ribbon of despair winding into the unknown, carrying countless lost souls in its dark embrace. Jack's story soon found its way onto CB channels, truck stop bulletin boards, and even local newspapers. Other drivers came forward with their own chilling accounts, and as the tales multiplied, it became clear that the haunted highways were not a myth, but a grim reality. A reality where the toll of sorrow was paid by every trucker who dared to venture too deep into the heart of darkness. Years later, long after Jack's rig had been found abandoned on a desolate stretch of road, his recordings and journal entries were preserved in a small museum dedicated to trucking history, a macabre reminder of the night when the road claimed another soul. For those who knew the legends of haunted highways, his story served as both warning and memorial. And on dark, stormy nights, when the mist rolls in thick and the sound of a distant engine echoes through the void, truckers still swear they can hear Jack's voice on the CB, urging them to remember to heed the ghostly warnings of the endless road.
Story number 10.
The late summer air was thick with humidity and the tang of pine as a group of friends arrived at Pine Hollow Campground, a secluded patch of wilderness known to few but reputed by locals for inexplicable happenings. Among them was Rebecca, a determined and resourceful college student with a passion for urban legends, and her longtime friends Mark, a practical and steadfast outdoorsman, and Elise, whose quiet sensitivity made her acutely aware of things unseen. With a battered trailer full of camping gear and enough supplies for several days, they set up their tents in a clearing surrounded by towering pines and dense underbrush. The fading sunlight painted the sky a blood orange as they laughed and traded stories, unaware that this would be more than a weekend of friendly camaraderie. That first night, as they sat around a crackling campfire, the forest around them seemed to pulse with life. The gentle pop and crack of burning wood provided a comforting backdrop to their conversations. Mark recounted a tale he had heard from an old local, a story of a ghostly figure roaming the campground long after the campers had retreated into their tents. They say she was once a camper who died in a terrible accident on these very grounds, Mark said, his voice low and earnest. Some folks claim you can hear her crying out for help when the woods get dark. His tone was cautious, as if invoking the legend might somehow conjure it into existence. Rebecca smiled ruefully. Ghost stories are nothing but overblown superstition. There's always a logical explanation for every sound you hear. Elise, who had been unusually quiet, nodded slowly, her eyes reflecting the dancing flames as she whispered, "But what if some things defy logic?" Their laughter and teasing gradually subsided into a comfortable silence as the night deepened. The fire's glow was soon swallowed by shadows, and the only sounds were the rustling of leaves in the warm breeze and the distant call of a night bird. At some point, Rebecca excused herself to fetch water from a small nearby stream. While she walked along the narrow trail, her flashlight beam swaying with each step, an odd sensation crept over her. The forest was too quiet, no chirps, no gentle murmur of wildlife, and for a moment, she felt as if she were being watched. A rustle in the undergrowth made her freeze, and she slowly turned toward the sound. There, a pair of eyes glinted briefly in the beam, then vanished into the darkness. Rebecca's heart pounded as she hurried back to camp, determined to brush off the incident as the product of her fatigue and the eerie atmosphere. Later, as the friends huddled back at the fire, Rebecca recounted her encounter. "I swear I saw something, 2 eyes following me," she said, voice trembling slightly. Mark raised an eyebrow. "Probably a raccoon or a deer," he suggested, though his tone lacked full conviction. Elise's face grew pale. "It didn't sound like any animal I know," she murmured. A chill seemed to pass through the group, and though they tried to dismiss it with nervous jokes, an inexplicable tension settled in. The next morning dawned overcast and cool. The trio packed up their gear for a day hike into the deeper woods, where an old hiking trail wound its way past a small, abandoned ranger station. Mark led the way confidently, a thermos of coffee in hand and his dog tags clinking softly as he moved. The conversation was light initially, discussions about the best trails in the region and amusing anecdotes from past camping trips. But as they trekked deeper into the forest, their surroundings took on an oppressive quality. The trees grew closer together, the canopy so dense that little daylight reached the ground, and the trail became overgrown and barely visible. Midway through the hike, Elise stopped suddenly, peering into the gloom with wide eyes. "Do you guys hear that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. All three paused. In the heavy silence, a peculiar sound emerged, a slow, rhythmic tapping, as if something wooden or metallic was being struck repeatedly. The sound was distant, yet unnervingly persistent, echoing around the trees like a morbid heartbeat. Probably just a loose branch hitting the ground, Mark reasoned, though his tone betrayed his uncertainty. Rebecca, ever the skeptic but now visibly shaken, shook her head. That sound, it wasn't natural. The group fell silent, straining to determine its source, but the tapping persisted and then abruptly ceased, leaving only the echo of its absence. By the time they reached the abandoned ranger station, twilight was approaching. The crumbling building, overtaken by ivy and moss, exuded the aura of neglect and secrets long buried. Inside, the musty smell of decay and old paper hung in the air. The trio decided to take shelter for the night there, thinking that the dilapidated building might offer a reprieve from the sinister atmosphere outside. After a cautious exploration, they set up a small fire in what had once been the main room, its walls lined with faded maps and weathered photographs that hinted at a past filled with both promise and sorrow. That night, as rain pattered against the broken windows of the station, strange things began to happen. Elise woke early, troubled by nightmares of a woman in a tattered dress wandering aimlessly among the trees. In the dim light of a flickering lantern, she could have sworn she saw the figure standing at the window, her eyes hollow and pleading. I must be dreaming," Elise muttered to herself, but the lingering sense of dread refused to dissipate as the hours passed. Around midnight, a sudden clamor outside startled the group awake. Loud thumps and the unmistakable sound of something heavy being dragged across the gravel shattered the hushed calm of the station. Mark grabbed a sturdy flashlight and led the way to the door. Opening it cautiously, he peered out into the torrential downpour. The rain blurred his vision, making it nearly impossible to discern shapes in the dark. Amid the cascade of water and shadows, he could just make out a figure stumbling along the perimeter of the building. "Over there!" he shouted urgently, pointing to where a vaguely human shape moved clumsily behind the trees. The group hurried outside, their flashlights casting erratic beams among the rain-soaked foliage. Rebecca's voice trembled as she called, "Hello? Who's there? We're not trying to hurt you." There was no reply at first, only the sound of the rain and the distant rumble of thunder. Then, as they drew closer, the figure turned toward them, and beneath the shroud of rain they saw a face contorted in despair. The figure's eyes were glazed with tears, and it whispered in a quavering tone, "I'm lost. Help me." Its voice was tinged with sorrow and a deep, otherworldly longing. Mark stepped forward cautiously, his voice firm yet gentle. "What happened to you? Who are you?" The figure's lips moved as if struggling to form words. I can't remember. The fire. The night," it murmured, before falling silent and dissolving back into the mist as if it were never truly there. The friends stood in disoriented silence, the sound of rain mingling with their ragged breathing. Back inside the station, the atmosphere grew more oppressive. The rain outside pounded relentlessly, and a sense of loss and despair seemed to seep through the walls. In the flickering glow of the lantern, Elise's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she recounted a memory from long ago, a fragment of a half-remembered tale about a tragic accident on these same roads. "They say that a young woman was out camping just like us, and when her tent caught fire, she was never found," Elise whispered, her voice trembling. "Maybe her spirit is still trying to find peace." Rebecca put a comforting hand on her shoulder. "It's just a story," she said, though even she was unsure if that was the truth. At some point during the long, sleepless night, the friends began to experience disturbances that defied rational explanation. Objects in the old station shifted positions when no one was looking, and the sound of footsteps echoed through the corridors long after they had fallen silent. Rebecca, determined to document every detail, scribbled frantic notes in her journal by the meager light of the lantern. Mark paced the wooden floor, his eyes darting toward dark corners as if expecting to see a spectral figure emerging at any moment. Elise sat huddled by a window, gazing out at the storm as if trying to catch a glimpse of something in the swirling darkness. Just as dawn began to creep through the grime of the windows, the station's main door creaked open slowly, revealing nothing but the endless gray of the rain-soaked morning. The oppressive night had passed, yet the memories of it and the inexplicable phenomena lingered like a curse. The trio emerged from the building, backpacks slung over their shoulders, each of them silently vowing never to forget the night's terrors. They packed up their belongings in near silence, the earlier humor and banter long replaced by a somber understanding that some mysteries were perhaps better left unexplored. As they drove back along the winding forest road in their battered SUV, the landscape bore the scars of the storm, and every rustle of the wind through the trees made them glance nervously at one another. Rebecca's mind churned with thoughts of the lost, sorrowful figure and the whispered legend of a tragedy that haunted the woods. Mark's steady demeanor had given way to a haunted vigilance, and Elise's once bright eyes now carried a quiet, reflective sorrow. Later that day, after returning to civilization and the comforting buzz of everyday life, the three friends gathered in a modest diner near the edge of town to discuss their experiences. Over cups of lukewarm coffee, they talked in hushed tones about what they had witnessed. "It wasn't just my imagination," Mark insisted. "There was something there, a real tragic presence." Rebecca nodded, her journal filled with frantic scribbles acting as silent testament to the horror of that night. Elise, speaking softly, added, "I'm not sure if we disturbed someone's memory or if we were meant to help them, but I can't shake the feeling that we witnessed something that shouldn't have been forgotten." Their conversation turned into a pact, an unspoken agreement to return one day and try to piece together the full story of the tragedy that haunted Pine Hollow Campground. Each of them knew that the line between myth and reality had blurred irreparably during that long, terrifying night. It was as if the forest, the abandoned station, and even the ghosts of the past had reached out to remind them that every landscape harbors its secrets, and every campfire shares its own quiet lament. Years later, each of them would recall that night with a chill in their hearts. Rebecca's detailed account of their experiences was published in a modest local magazine, garnering attention from both skeptics and believers. Mark, who had always been the rock among them, wore a perpetual look of vigilance, his eyes scanning every shadow, every unexpected movement, as if he could never quite shake the memory of those lost souls calling out in the dark. Elise, transformed by the encounter, became an advocate for mental health and emotional healing, her gentle determination a tribute to the tragedy that had so indelibly marked her spirit. On cold, quiet nights when the wind rustled through the pines and the darkness seemed to press in on the edges of the world, some campers claimed to hear a soft, sorrowful cry echoing from beyond the trees. And in the farthest reaches of Pine Hollow Campground, near where an old, abandoned ranger station still stood, a single, weathered journal page fluttered in the breeze, a page bearing the meticulous handwriting of a young woman who once witnessed things that defied explanation. In a way, that page, and the memories it represented, became part of the forest's lore. It reminded all who ventured into the woods that even the most benign settings could hide dark secrets, and that the past, no matter how buried, always finds a way to call out to the living. And so, when new campers pitched their tents and lit their campfires under a sky littered with stars, some would pause to listen, hoping that if they listened closely enough, they might hear a whisper on the wind, a quiet plea to remember, and a promise that no story was ever truly forgotten.